Different stat here. We're using 60 mils. Is there a way to stand everything so we know one or the other? I guess for their safe data.
Kurt, I hear you.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay. It's really great. That's a double. That's what it would be great. Okay, that would be great. Thank you for telling me. That's exactly what I need. Yeah, this is great.
Jump in here and say something.
This one's saying 20%.
Okay, if you could have your seats, we'll get going.
This value engineering proposal?
We do the pledge of allegiance.
That was after the due date. Is that a, can you?
Hello.
Usually you say no. Oh, got it. Good.
Call the meeting to order, and we have a full agenda today. My name's Dick Bankhead, and I was unvolunteered, appointed to do this today, and I'm kidding. We stand up and say the pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, and I promised myself I wouldn't say this, but Marine Corps has 250-year birthday this year.
Nice.
So,
Good info.
okay. Roll call. Now, how do we do this? She's doing it, you got that?
I got that.
Okay.
Morning, everyone.
We have a quorum?
Well, we're going to call a roll.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Don Dice is not here. Mark Schroep.
Here.
Richard Nipper.
Here.
Bruce Larson is not here. Kimberly is not here. Deborah Harmon. Here. Laura Lee Thompson.
Here.
Nicholas Anzone.
Here.
Richard Bankhead.
Here?
Aaron Adams.
Here.
Kurt Smith.
Here.
Fred Goldstein.
Here.
Barbara is not here. Eric Mann is.
Here.
John Windsor.
Here.
And Charlie is not here. We do have a quorum.
Good. Approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the agenda from the from the March meeting.
Thank you. Second?
I second.
Vote? Do we have to vote on that?
Yes.
Yes. Do we have a vote? Everybody in agreement? Nays?
Aye.
Ayes?
Aye.
Nays? Well, maybe you can get a Marine through this.
Like I said, it's the blind leading the blind.
Approval of minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I'm sorry.
He made a motion.
Motion.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Ayes?
Aye.
Aye. Nays? Okay, we'll move to the project process and physical reports with Virginia.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm going to skip around on the little one-page progress report that you have and just pick up some highlights. So 20 more quick connects to sewer, existing sewer lines were completed, one more septic upgrade. We have a stormwater project up in the north end of the county on Flounder that has reached substantial completion, and another one, the West Arlington Basin. We have another monthly report from our third-party oyster monitoring by the University of Central Florida at a site that was just installed 3 months ago in the Banana River. It has a density of 237 live oysters per square meter, which is more than double the 100 live oysters per square meter that is our target. And the mean shell height on those of 60 millimeters, that's reproductive size. So that site is doing very, very well, which is extremely good news because we've had some false starts in the Banana River over the years. We removed one more derelict vessel. Work underway this month. The first one there, the C10 water management area, this is being managed by the St. Johns River Water Management District. The request for qualifications to design that project is open. That is a huge, like $40 million project that's going to redivert millions of gallons of water back to the St. Johns River and keep that excess fresh water out of the Indian River Lagoon. So we're excited that that project is being advertised to get the design going. Construction has started on Sykes Creek T septic to sewer project. We had 3 projects, M, N, and T, that were awarded not too long ago, and we've finally broken ground on the first of those. Then a stormwater project on Pioneer Road. The shop drawings have been approved by Public Works, so that should get going here to construction here soon. Vegetation harvesting is underway at Kelly Park, if anybody wants to swing by a park and see vegetation harvesting. The O'Galley muck dredging project, we have been in negotiations with the sole bidder, and we're hopeful that we will complete negotiations next week. We've got another negotiation meeting, what we hope is the last negotiation meeting, set up for Wednesday of next week. Grand Canal dredging is proceeding on track. That 445,000 cubic yards, that's about 3/4 of the volume of muck in that canal system has been removed now. The Titusville Causeway Multi-Trophic Restoration and Living Shoreline Resiliency Project, all the wave attenuation devices have been moved off the shoreline and out into the water. The last of them, the water was, we just made it through our really, really low water season of the year, and the water was too shallow for the barge to be able to get them to where they're supposed to be. So they're staged in the water very close to where they're supposed to be and off the shoreline. In the meantime, they've gone ahead and they've pulled the riprap off the shoreline. So that is mostly complete, and they have been hauling sand this week for the shoreline restoration work. So they've hauled over 40 truckloads of clean fill into the site this week. And then the other thing work underway this month to highlight is that the budget change request that amended the county's budget to incorporate all of the changes that were made in the 2025 Save Our Lagoon Plan update, all the new projects that were added. That BCR was approved by the county commission. So on the other side, presentations, I got to do an extremely speedy presentation at a budget workshop. Melanie got to present the pilot Pond Watch program to the South Lake HOA. I got to do a presentation to the American Water Resources Association at their technical meeting. EGAD art and music event, first Fridays down in O'Galley. That was very successful. We had a whole team of folks there working that event. Melbourne Beach Nature Day, Don Dice, who's on your committee but not here today, and Abby worked that event, had a good flow of people coming through. And then last weekend was Enchanted Forest Earth Day that Melanie did. Tomorrow, Anthony and I will be working the electric car event at the Muscle Car Museum, which is missing from here because we didn't know about it at the time. But so we're looking forward to that event. They've got over 200 people signed up, RSVP'd for that event already. And then the last thing I wanted to point out was the Tire Island cleanup. So Fred, do you want to introduce Sharon, and hopefully Logan has got videos ready to roll, whatever
Sure.
order you want to do.
So I see Sharon's back there. Sharon is one of 4 founders of Waterway Warriors, and they've been doing an incredible job just growing that organization from first starting with a bridge and now expanding out, only associated with the lagoon and the waterways. And so there were these tires sitting out there on one of the islands, and as you'll see in the videos, they put together an incredible group of people, and obviously we had mosquito control involved. We had the Cocoa Beach Public Works involved. We had Waterway Warriors and captains and gator dredging and put together to pull out what turned out to be over 500 tires are there, and we pulled out 321 of them in 4 hours.
Wow.
And the other 200 plus are stacked up and ready to go in just a few weeks. We'll go back out. I don't know if you wanted Sharon to say anything or to run the videos, or, thank you.
Looks like Logan's ready to go. Maybe. Logan, do you have the other one too?
No, we don't.
The Explore the IRL?
No, we don't have that one. I don't have that on the thumb drive, 'cause that's
Yeah, yeah.
yours.
Oh, no, I sent it in an email to Logan.
All right, well, so about more than half of the tire, you want to come up, Sharon? About half of the tires were removed, and they added up to over 11,000 pounds.
So it added up
Yes.
to about 11,000 pounds is what mosquito control removed in the first batch. We still have about, we're thinking between 200 and 300 out there that the volunteers are now stacked, piled, ready to go. We've got the event scheduled for May, so, and that's again another volunteer event to be able to get them out. And then the ultimate goal is to restore this part of the island, to actually create some erosion protection. That is the ultimate goal, but doing it in a way that nature can embrace it. There was absolutely no life where these tires were. There was no grass, there were no sea life, there was nothing out there in these two pockets where the tires were. So we really want to give the island an opportunity to heal itself and to create that erosion protection. So that's our ultimate goal.
So May 17th?
The tentative date is May 17th. We want to make sure everyone is on board in writing before we announce that in total. The 50 volunteers that came out, there's not one of them that doesn't want to come back. So we now have to limit the number of people, which I never thought would happen, to go on out there and remove this. Everyone wants to be a part of this. It's been embraced. We want to publicly thank Mosquito Control for for including us in the tire amnesty kind of grant. And more than anything, we really want to give a shout out to Gator Dredging, because they donated their captain, their boat, their hands for the entire morning. They are willing and wanting to come back. And it's because of their boat that we were not going to put these tires on private boats. That wasn't going to happen. And we couldn't have done that in the vast amount that we had. So Gator Dredging, we want to say a public thank you. Thank you. Oh.
Virginia, I got a question for you, and this may be a dumb question, but I don't know the answer, so I'm going to ask the dumb question. What is it about tires that is detrimental? I thought they were just inert.
They're leaching.
So, yeah, they can leach all kinds of things, especially the steel belted radials as that metal breaks down. Those heavy metals are polluting, but, you know, also just the hydrocarbons in the rubber.
Good to know.
Yeah, there are studies that show how damaging it is to salmon. I haven't seen any studies to fish on the East Coast, but, you know, if they're bad for salmon, they're probably bad for our fish too.
Yeah, just point out, I mean, I pulled a few out of Sykes Creek, and they degrade. I mean, I literally have pulled some up with a grappling hook, and they just fall apart. They sit in there that long, and that stuff's definitely coming out. The second thing I'd just like to point out is I listened to the presentation for the budget, I think, for mosquito control, and I think they last year did 60 tons. And you think this is one day, this is about almost 6. And with the rest, we'll go over that, quite a bunch of tires in one day.
Right, so mosquito control applied for and received a grant that funds the disposal costs of the tires. So you can imagine that there's quite a disposal cost on 11,000 pounds of tires. And so it's just great that they found this grant program and managed to get these funds, so.
So here's another dumb question. How on earth did all those tires get there? Is that do they have a sign there that says, bring your used and worn tires here?
Somebody thought it was a good idea.
Yeah,
Because that's a lot of tires.
Yeah.
Can I answer that one, Virginia? Is that okay?
We believe that according to local lore, so this is from multiple different sources, that back in the early 70s, they were placed there for erosion control. And if that was the goal, and we want to honor that goal. So we believe that they were, according to local lore, they were placed there like a retaining wall to actually deliberately stop the erosion. First few hurricanes, according to local lore, first few hurricanes came through and scattered everything. So that's why we want to be able to restore that area. Did that help?
Well, I have a few tires at my dock, so now the question is, I'm obviously going to get them out of the water, because I didn't think they mattered. But, so what do I do with those? There's probably 5 or 6?
so mosquito control is organizing multiple tire amnesty days funded with this grant. And so a few weeks ago, they staged next door at the health department building, and people could drop off, it was up to 6 or 10 tires per person. And they collected about 12,000 pounds of tires at that first event.
That's great.
So, yeah, there's a lot of tires
So
out there.
I'll just get them out of the water, and then when I hear about that, then I'll
Yeah.
Yes.
get them out.
Yep.
You're allowed to take 4 a year to landfill as an individual in the county, and that's it.
Which Fred's very experienced with.
Yeah.
He's
Thank
been
you.
doing his part. All right, Chair, that's my report.
Wonderful. Okay, move on to Lori.
Onto the TVs in here are black. I don't, is there anything on that one? Yes, okay.
There we go. Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Before I get started, a little birdie had suggested that we kind of go over this first chart right here so that everybody's on sync and understands it, okay? So we're going to go over it. So if you notice the green line, that is the state economic and demographic research projections for sales tax. Okay, that would be our little green line right here. So right now, it's kind of hard to see because it's all going together, but as it starts separating, you'll see it right in here, okay? The blue line, which is the county's 2025 projection, as you can see, we're on sync right through here, and then it goes up a little bit. And then the purple line is the actual sales tax we have received. So I just kind of wanted to go over that with you so that everybody can understand. Because I know it is a little confusing. When I first saw it, I was like, what is all these lines?
And we used to show, right, so each line is a different year, and we used to show all the years, and it was just compressing and compressing. So the committee talked about it for a while and said, let's try 3 years, no more than 3 years at a time on the graph. But we're certainly, you know, amenable to changing this however you want it. It's for your information.
And I do apologize, I have noticed that my little totals for the up here is not popping up, so I'm gonna try to figure out why it's not popping up. So I did notice that, I'm like, when I was reviewing this, so I will hopefully by the next meeting get that corrected, and that way we can see a total of everything, okay? All right. So now we're going to move on to our financial statements. We have received $4.1 million for January collections. And the total from revenue conception is $447 million. Which, there's that total right there for us, okay? For the monthly financial statement, the anticipated $504 million in revenue. By the end of the fiscal year, the actuals received so far are $409.9 million so far. For our expenditures this fiscal year, the total assigned for the project and programs is $84 million. And right now, we've actually spent $8.8 million right now, okay? Do we have any questions or anything? Yes.
Down the road question, on the grants we got, you know, in the last whatever time period is, will you add that and change this? And I know you explained that a lot of it didn't come to us, but.
And you can explain that there's grant, if you scroll back up. So the top table are all the revenues, and there are several lines there for different kinds of grants. So as we receive grants, we do budget changes, and once those are approved, they get incorporated into this monthly table.
Yes.
Okay. Just curious, and a little different question. You mentioned that some of that money went to, you know, other people with our projects. So that won't go into here, or will it?
No, it won't show up in the county's budget. It will show up in the plan in Table 6-9, where we show how much swirl funding there is for each project,
Okay.
and what the total funding is for those projects.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. And then next month will be the grant breakdowns, because that's the quarterly.
Oh, that's
So
right.
then that's where you're going to see that a little bit more breakdown next
Yeah,
month when we do it. Okay?
Yeah, y'all told me about the quarter one last week.
Yes,
Last month,
yeah, because I
forgot.
remember last month you had to ask about that, and that's coming up next month for you. Okay? All right, well, thank you.
One quick question.
Oh, yes, sir.
This was the first month with the capital outlay, that 27,600. What was that for?
I would have to get back with you on that, because this is done at the first of the month for me when I do these.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Is that our vehicle? Because that's just a sign.
Oh, yes, that
Right.
could be, yes, that is our new vehicle that we're purchasing for Sorrel. Thank you.
We
Great.
ordered it.
Mhm,
It
yes.
hasn't arrived yet,
Yeah.
but
Okay, thanks.
Yes, I'm sorry. Okay.
Morning. I'm Chuck Jacoby, and I'm probably here for multiple reasons, but the main one is because whenever Virginia tells me to do, I try to do. So I've tried to organize this around sort of 3 quotes. The first thing I want to do is to try to illustrate for you that, you know, you're not just people out there taking a walk, even though you are kind of leading the charge on restoring the lagoon, but there are a lot of people joining into this effort. The second one is to kind of go back and go over a little bit of a potted history about how we got where we are. I think my hope is that by having a little bit of understanding of what we think we understand about what's been going on in the lagoon, it'll maybe help you as you think about what you want to do in the future. And the last one is to answer this question that a well-known lagoon expert asks all the time whenever I do an egghead speech like this. And that's, so what? So what I'll start with is the fact that you have a shared challenge. This is not the only place that is dealing with the issues you're dealing with. And that includes Lake Apopka. This is an example of a slide that used by the district to talk about Lake Apopka, where they're talking about the benefits of reducing phosphorus loads, the amount of phosphorus that gets into the lake. And the shared part of this is that any place there are submerged aquatic vegetation, sort of rooted large plants, they need a lot of light. And they're at the bottom, so they're the last ones to get the light. And so if you get too much nutrients, the small single-celled plants in the water column take up those nutrients better, as it were, when they're in the water column. And they shade out those plants on the bottom. And then what happens is eventually the plants can't photosynthesize enough to maintain their body mass, then they die. And you lose your habitat for fish like bass and stuff. In the lagoon, it's a little more complex because we have to consider nitrogen as well. And in fact, we probably want to think about the ratio of nitrogen and phosphorus. So nitrogen and phosphorus are the two macronutrients, the ones that are used in the largest quantities by plants and animals. Right? But the overall story is the same. The phytoplankton can get to them quicker. They're up in the water column. They get the light. They shade out the plants on the bottom. The habitat goes away. And you see effects flow up. And I'll talk about some of that later. Now, is this true of the Indian River Lagoon? I mean, do we have an issue? And yeah, I mean, we do. These are quotes from newspapers, right? So fish are dying, gases, strange colors, confusion about what the hell's going on. And those are from the 1900 period, right? So the lagoon has always had this kind of issue, in a sense, right? The lagoon is a place that will always have blooms. Not all blooms are bad. They're part of the productivity that drive what makes the place special. It's when they get out of balance, as it were, right? When the nutrient inputs exceed that what the system can cope with, the shock absorbers in the system, as it were, the way the nutrients are cycled, get overloaded. And that's when you get the phytoplankton taken over and the switch, loss of the key habitat. All right, so the lagoon, part of what makes it special is also what makes it sensitive. All right, so its functioning is a key part of what everybody loves about the lagoon, but it also makes it a little bit sensitive. Here's some characteristics that we should consider. These are receiving water bodies, as we call them, right? So they sum up all the inputs from the land, and they gather that into one place. The lagoon, belies its name. It's not a river. It doesn't have that kind of hydrologic forcing that you get in, say, another, like the St. Johns River or someplace like that. The lagoon is segmented. So if you look at the image on the right-hand side, that's a model that looked at what we call water age. Just think of it as how long a parcel of water stays in a place. And you can see that it runs from sort of 3 months, the blue areas, as you go south, right? That's where the inlets are. And then when you start looking at where the yellow and orange are, those are the places where water stays for a fairly long period of time. And that oval sort of highlights, the Banana River Lagoon, right? Where water can stay for years. So these receiving water bodies, and because of the way they work, when nutrients get in the system, they stay there. And so that's one of the reasons why we have to be careful with the loads, right? Because we just don't have it going somewhere else. The other thing is that it makes the management a little more challenging than some of these other places that have the same issues, right? So you can't do an upstream project to fix the downstream like they can in, say, the St. Johns River or the Everglades even, right? You do upstream stuff and it makes the Everglades better. You also, because of the fact that the lagoon doesn't necessarily mix internally very fast, you also can't do one project and have it spread its effect over the whole lagoon, right? It's kind of in chunks. So you can't do like Apopka where they put a flowway on the north shore, right? And they filter the water as it comes in, and that affects the whole lake. That's not going to work for the whole lagoon. A lot of people say, well, let's change that. Let's change the physics of it. And, you could try, but the key to me is that some of those characteristics that make this sensitive are also what make it special. So I think you want to be really cautious as you try that. Think about that. So why do we have this issue? Almost everywhere, it's basically just numbers of people in a given area. So that the graph on the left is just the census population from the counties up this way. And you can see around 1950, it just started climbing, right? And as my wife would say, that's because air conditioning makes Florida livable, and you wouldn't be here otherwise. But a lot of things, space, mosquito control, a variety of things sort of boosted the population. And on the right-hand side is a graphic that tries to say, and here's the kinds of activities that then start to cause problems. And we'll go into that a little more in a later slide. So, in about the late 1990s, folks from the St. Johns River Water Management District, where I used to work, they noticed that the lagoon was having some issues, right? And in particular, again, it was the SAV, the seagrasses in the lagoon, right? These rooted plants. And they noticed that there was a relationship between loads of nutrients and suspended sediment, light, and then the response of seagrass. And so they put out what was called a pollutant load reduction goal, right? So they said, okay, we're having an issue. We think we need to reduce loads to this level. When the districts do that, that sort of keys off this whole string of things that happen after that. The districts proposed that the depth at the offshore end of the seagrass canopy be a metric of how well the lagoon was doing. And that's because that's the deep edge, quote unquote, and that's where the light's going to be the least. That's where seagrass is going to struggle the most. So if that's doing okay, then the rest of it probably is too. So that kind of kicked off restoration. And there's sort of a couple of main ways that this is going on for parts of the lagoon. There's the total maximum daily load and basin management action plan, TMDL BMAP process, right? And almost everyone in this room has had something to do with that. Virginia knows a little bit about it. But the basic premise is that you estimate what is a total maximum daily load that is safe from all the sources. Then you look at what the estimates of the current loads are, and in this case, we're talking nitrogen and phosphorus, and you say, well, if the TMDL is less than the current load, we need to reduce the loads to get down to a safe level. And then the commitments to do that by all the stakeholders, they get bundled up into these basin management action plans, right? Which says, this is how we're going to do that. You've given us this amount to reduce. Brevard County gets X amount to reduce. Here's how we're going to achieve that goal. There's another way, which is a little less regulatory, and that's where the stakeholders kind of get ahead of the process and they say, well, we can see this coming, and so we're going to set up our own plan. We're going to have a reasonable assurance plan, or a RAP. And that's up in Mosquito Lagoon, where they weren't declared impaired in the first round of things, but they could see it coming. And so they said, well, we'll try to get ahead of the game. Same basic premise, though. Again, people commit to doing things to reduce load. You make the estimate of how much protection you need. And both of those get reviewed by the Department of Environmental Protection at the state level and the EPA at the federal level. So that's underway around the lagoon. So how do people make this happen? What drives this, as it were? So that top, the environmental resource permits in white, that's to remind me to talk about that red box in the diagram there. So the TMDL, the BMAP, and the RAP are all backward-looking things, right? They're all saying, hey, we kind of messed up in the past and we want to fix it. So it's restoring things. The environmental resource permits, or ERPs, are forward-looking things that say, hey, this is what we learned from looking backward. This is what we want to do in the future to not have as much of a problem. So that's an important part of the piece of the way this works. So in the diagram, again, you see a variety of ways that nutrients get into the system. A lot of people call them sources. A lot of that I tend to think of more as pathways. There are ways for the nutrients to get into the system. The nutrients themselves, the nitrogen and phosphorus atoms, come from burning fossil fuels, putting fertilizer out, waste products from people and animals. That's where the nitrogen and phosphorus actually lives. The stormwater picks it up and carries it to the lagoon. Likewise, when you divert canals, like the C10 was talked about, right? When you divert water, that'll bring nutrients with it from a basin that wasn't supposed to be connected to the lagoon. So anyway, so on the right-hand side in the text there, the best management practices, that's for a lot of the agricultural inputs, right? That's how they're regulated, and that's done through FDACS, Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. The wastewater treatment, reverse osmosis, a lot of that stuff, that's all done through DEP, Environmental Protection. So they're the regulator. Likewise, to reduce non-point sources, right? Those are things where, that's picking up fertilizer from neighborhoods, not from a single house. Those non-point sources are also handled by DEP. For the lagoon, the things in yellow in the diagram, so the atmospheric deposition, it's just stuff that rains out of the atmosphere, either dry or when it actually is wet deposition. The groundwater, which we know some gets into the lagoon, and the muck, which you folks deal with a lot, those were all kind of handled implicitly, right? They weren't explicitly given reductions. They were built into the margin of safety. So have people been doing things? Yes. So this is about a year old, maybe it's a little more than a year old now, but they gathered these numbers together when they get the wherewithal to do it. But there are 10 projects that are proposed in the reasonable assurance plan up in Mosquito Lagoon. Again, that's a relatively small part of the system. 9 of which are completed or ongoing. Ongoing things are like street sweeping and educational things that also get credit for helping to reduce loads, right? They got one project left that's still kind of in the planning stage. From the other basin management action plans that are relevant, there's over 1,000 projects. 900, just short of 950, have been completed or are ongoing, and another around 200 to go. So that's the effort, right? People are putting in the effort. What's the result? Well, again, we measure the result initially by the credits for reducing nitrogen and phosphorus loads. And these are the values from the recent statewide report for that. So you have the Mosquito Lagoon, Banana River Lagoon, Northern Indian River Lagoon, and Central Indian River Lagoon. The northern central boundary is about 192. The percent remaining is the purple, the percent complete is the green. So you can see that other than the total phosphorus reductions for the Mosquito Lagoon that they promised in the reasonable assurance plan, we're about a little under 2/3 at best, maybe more like around a halfway home towards the TMDL, right? The TMDL runs out to 2035, and so they've hit the milestones thus far, and so the hope is that they will continue to do so. All right, so who's doing this? I mean, we talked about the regulators being DEP, FDACS. Well, I mean, you folks are right out in front with your monies, and you know more about this than I do, so I'll just move on to the next one. The state has been contributing. So a lot of times that's in the cost share projects, right? So some of the grants that were mentioned, those kinds of things. And then this is a recent poll of the sort of values for the state, right? So completed projects are the brown blobs. Underway are the green, and the planned ones are in the sort of mauve color there. So, people are working on it. You also have the estuary program, the National Estuary Program. They get some funding from the US EPA, but they also get funding from the coalition of the counties, the 2 water management districts, and the DEP. And the EPA has a non-voting sort of seat on that. They only have about $1 million a year to put into restoration, directly, hands-on sort of stuff. But I'll talk about another thing that they do, which the estuary program is really helpful because it thinks about the whole system, right? So it spans the counties, and it spans the water management districts, and it tries to think broadly about what goes on. And that'll come up in a minute. The district up this way, that's the St. John's District. Down south, it's South Florida Water Management District. But here's some recent numbers on what the district's been up to. So 59 cost-share grant-funded projects. Not all of those target reductions in nutrients. Sometimes reduction in nutrients come along with reductions in freshwater inputs, things like that. But an estimated 140,000 pounds of nitrogen and 11,000 pounds of phosphorus a year. But there also are these 6 regional district-led projects. So the district can be helpful when you need something that, again, spans counties or, is going to help multiple cities. And the estimated reductions from those are a little bit bigger. So 1.2 million pounds of nitrogen, 250,000 pounds of phosphorus per year. So, people are contributing. The other thing from the district is that they're, certainly up in this region, one of the main players in terms of tracking what's going on. So the whole TMDL BMAP process has uncertainty that surrounds those estimates. We don't know exactly how much nitrogen and phosphorus are going, and we estimate how much there is. And so to cope with that uncertainty, they base success on an independent measure, something in the system typically, right? So seagrasses has been the measure for the basin management action plans up this way, and will probably continue to be, but there may be some additional things put in there. Anyway, but to do that, you have to have the measures of what's going on out in the system. So these dots on this first map here, they're continuous monitoring devices that are out in the system. So they take temperature and DO and pH and they measure other parameters at these places. And that can be really helpful because that gives you a much more coherent time series, right? So every hour they're sending data back to the home base. But there also are these water quality stations where you have monthly sampling going on up and down the lagoon. And that's a little bit chunkier time step, but there are a lot more places. And so we can combine the two and get some idea what's going on there. Plus the parameters that they measure are more broad suite of parameters. Then there's the seagrass transects. They're done twice a year. And Lori's going to come up here in a little bit and talk about some of that. But they're also mapping every other year. So try to get this fine scale picture with the transects, right? So that's, what's the percent cover? Get the broad scale footprint with the mapping. All right, now I'm going to switch to kind of a potted history, as it were. So 1992, the lagoon the restoration really started to kick in. By 2009, we'd seen expanses of seagrass, and the arrows point at sort of several places where you can see it. Again, this is from the mapping. 2011, lost a lot of that. By 2019, had lost about 58% of the footprint, right? So much like my poor hair, it's like receding, right? But not only that, 89% of the cover. So the few hairs that are left, they're kind of lonely because they've lost all their brother, right? So a lot of seagrass left the system. So why? What happened there? I mean, this was like right in the midst of trying to wrap up the TMDL BMAP process, right? So you can imagine the chaos that, yes, the gnashing of teeth and tearing of clothes that happened when all this occurred. What happened were a series of phytoplankton blooms. This is the brown tide from 2016, which I think a lot of people remember because it was pretty dramatic. But there were others. The 2011 losses, there was a bloom in 2011 that started this process, as it were. So these are satellite images where the satellite takes the light that bounces back, and then we can take those measurements and then use our water quality data and estimate how much chlorophyll, which is the thing that the phytoplankton have that takes the light out of the system, as it were. We can estimate how much chlorophyll there is. So the hotter the colors, the more chlorophyll there is. And the satellite images are probably not used to get an accurate measure of chlorophyll per se, but they can at least give you a picture of the extent of where chlorophyll is high. And so that 2011 bloom was very unusual. One, it was much more intense than the blooms that had been recorded in the past. Two, it was much more extensive than the blooms that had been recorded in the past. And three, it was much longer lasting than the blooms that had been recorded in the past. So it got dubbed the super bloom. Well, that was a little premature. So there was a bloom in 2012. That's the first time the brown tide showed up, and that was up in Mosquito Lagoon, and it kind of eked over into the northern Indian River Lagoon. 2016 was the major brown tide, and that surpassed the super bloom. So, you know, I'm not sure we've come up with the word for that yet, but people are working on it. So 2016, major bloom, 2019, another bloom, 2020, another bloom. Since 21, 22, we've been running pretty smooth for the moment, so knock on wood. Down at the bottom, there are some notes about fish kills. Fish kills in this case are not toxicity. It's not kind of like red tide on the Gulf Coast of Florida, right, where the toxin from the phytoplankton kills the fish. This is when the bloom crashes, as they call it. So the phytoplankton die en masse. The bacteria chew on the phytoplankton, use the oxygen in the water, drop the oxygen levels, and the fish can't get enough oxygen. So that's where the fish kills come in. So not only did we see a change in the quantity of phytoplankton, we saw a change in the quality of the phytoplankton as well. So the new players, which are on the right-hand side, were dominant compared to the old players that were dominant. Those are the ones on the left. The new players have a bunch of characteristics that make them particularly bad actors, as it were. They're smaller. So how small? Well, 220 microns. What does that mean? So look at your agenda, find a period, and you can put 200 to 500 of these things across that period, shoulder to shoulder. In the old version, in the old phytoplankton, you'd get 50 to 100 or so, right? So, I mean, they're all small, but the new ones are much smaller. Much smaller means they turn over much faster. So they get the number of them gets higher very quickly because they divide much more quickly. They also have some characteristics that make them a little harder to control. They have the ability to outcompete some of the older phytoplankton for nutrients in a variety of ways that I'm happy to discuss if somebody really wants to know. But they also have characteristics that keep the grazers, the things that would eat the phytoplankton, from eating them. So they kind of get what we call a boost from the bottom up, which is the nutrients, and they get a boost from avoiding the top-down control, which is the grazing. So when all this changed, did anything else change besides the habitat, as it were? And the answer is, yeah, we're starting to piece together some things that link up to those changes because they were major changes. So the 2013 and 2021 manatee unusual mortality events now have some links back to what went on. On the top row of figures there, on the left-hand side is a stomach full of drift algae. Looks like what the manatees did was when the seagrasses went away, they shifted to eating drift algae, which is plant material that rolls around on the bottom, like think tumbleweeds, as it were. And it turns out that in some cases, enough cases to make an unusual mortality event, that drift algae set off a bacterial reaction in the guts of these manatees. And the bacteria then produced a toxin, and that got into the system in the manatees. And so the manatees that were found dead in that event weren't starving. They just kind of suffered toxic shock syndrome, and so then the other one, the 2021 event, that is tied back to just lack of food. So on the bottom two figures there, the top one is a manatee that they normally look like. The bottom one has what they call peanut head, which is circled in the red. So they lose the blubber. They lose their condition because they don't have enough food. We're working on nailing down what happened to the fish assemblages through all this period. So here I have some figures of numbers in the seines that the Fisheries Independent Monitoring guys haul. That's the y-axis, and the time is the x-axis. And the arrows kind of point out the patterns. So pinfish numbers dropped and sort of stayed low. That's a little bit what you'd expect when you pull the habitat out from under them, right? But then other things like red drum, they dropped and then they kind of bounced back a little bit. Ladyfish, there was a pulse of a ladyfish caught. And that may have something to do with the efficiency of the gear. And then the third one is an even more complex thing where they dropped and they kind of came back and then they dropped again. So, you know, there's a lot to unpack, but the point is that there looks like there are effects that flow down to the fish populations. And then if we go from there, we can go to the dolphin populations, which feed on the fish. And so in 2013, they noticed around that time, a lot of dolphins with their ribs showing, like the figure on the left. Dolphins aren't supposed to have their ribs showing. Look like me a little more. And on the right is a graph that we used stable isotopes. So in all organisms, there's a couple of isotopes of nitrogen, a couple of isotopes of carbon. And you can look at the ratio of those. And the saying is, you are what you eat, right? So the black dots on that graph are the prey items. That's the carbon and nitrogen in the prey items. And the colored triangles are adult dolphins. And what you think about with these isotopes is it's like mixing hot water and cold water to get warm water. That's what happens in the dolphins, right? They eat this and they eat that, and then they get an isotope ratio somewhere in between the two. And the main point here is if you follow the arrow, from 1993 to 2013, there was a shift in diet. And when we looked at what they were eating, they had shifted from eating a lot of ladyfish, it turns out, to eating more sea bream. And there's less energy content in the sea bream. So they needed to eat about 15% more food in order to maintain the same metabolism. And that might have just been too much for some of the dolphins, which this is one of the only unusual mortality events that has a cause, and it was listed as ecological causes. And we think we've now been able to untangle that a little bit. And when they surveyed the free swimming dolphins, like about almost 2/3 of them were underweight, malnourished. So some, you know, for some dolphins it was just too much. For others, they were struggling. All right, so do we understand why? Not fully. I mean, it's really hard to reconstruct past events, right? But here's my hypothesis, as it were. So we had decades of loading, right? You saw that from like the 60s on, right? This system, as I said, the nutrients get processed, and the system can handle blooms and process those blooms. But if those things that handle that, the shock absorbers, as it were, if one of them gets broken or overstressed, things can tip really quickly. And we think that's what we saw. So we had, in sort of leading up to 2011, a couple of meteorological sort of events, right? Cold winters, hot summers. The cold winters led to fish kills. So there were about 400 tons of fish collected up around the Cape, right? And that was only a small part of the total number of fish that were killed. Those nutrients from the rotting fish, they go into the water. There was also, in the warmer weather, the bacteria in the muck produce more nutrients, fluxes more nutrients into the water. And so again, you had like multiple stressors coming together. Perfect storm sort of thing. Then, as soon as the phytoplankton got rolling and started shading out the seagrasses and the drift algae, you can see some drift algae there in that diagram in the middle on the bottom. As soon as those got shaded, now there's less competition for nutrients, means the phytoplankton get more nutrients, and so you spiral, right? And so that's what we think went on. It was like a tipping point for the lagoon, stressed to a point where it was about to tip, and then a sort of perfect storm, and it tipped over. Now, it has righted itself a bit, and you'll hear a little bit about that. And so it's probably doing what we call flickering. It's kind of, oh, I'm not too good, and then back again. And, so again, the last few years have been pretty good. All right, so as Bob would say, so what? Key message perhaps, stay the course, right? Stick with it. So, the district, we talk about diet, so reducing the external loads with treating stormwater, putting water back into the basins where it belongs, septic to sewer will help. Exercise, right, that's getting at the legacy loads like the muck, right? So, I mean, I can reduce my intake, but I'm gonna have to do some exercise if I wanna get back in shape. Physical therapy, restore some of the things that help, like the wetlands and filter feeders. And then keep going with the checkups and preventative care. So continue monitoring, continue looking for new ways to reduce loads of nutrients. And why do I say stay the course? 2 reasons. One is the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program took a look at, could we find the amount of money that we think we need to do this? And so they had someone go out there and look at sources of funding, seeking $250 million a year for 20 years. Right? So $5 billion. And the red box at the bottom says, hey, yeah, if everybody kind of does their part, there are sources of these funds out there. Will it be easy? No. I mean, you're competing with lots of other places, but it's doable. And the second reason is because some of the stuff we did at the district shows that if you head towards the TMDL, you may well see the response you're looking for. So this is that same sort of image, from July 2011, which shows the super bloom. We ran this model for like 5 years leading up and going past the super bloom. First of all, with the loads that were estimated to be going into Lagoon before anybody started counting credits for projects and things. And, the model output is a little wonky, as we expect. It's a model. But if you look, the oranges and the yellows kind of match up, right? And they're about the same extent of orange and yellow. And then we ran it saying, okay, let's start the 5-year term with 25% towards the target, 50, 75, and 100%. And what happens then? Well, if you look here, it takes you almost all the way up to 75% of the TMDL before the yellows really start to go away, right? And about at 100%, now you're looking pretty good. But remember, we're like about 50 to 60% of the way home. So that's why, you can do it, and it looks like you should do it. Another couple things, probably, as the folks who manage things think beyond kind of averages. So events, we have to probably build in elbow room in our management for events, right? You don't want to back the lagoon right up to the edge and then have it tip over just because something odd happened that nobody could predict. Understanding what nutrients do in the lagoon could be relatively valuable. So it's not just how much goes in, it's what does it do? And so understanding that cycling. And then, like with the chlorophyll, knowing a little bit more about what are the phytoplankton that are producing the chlorophyll may be helpful as well. Some of those new players are going to like a different nitrogen to phosphorus ratio and will be more dominant depending on where that ratio sits. That's why early on I said you want to consider nitrogen and phosphorus and the ratio of the two, because it may tilt your phytoplankton a different direction. Lastly, for this one, is got to be patient, all right? The system took a lot of pressure, went along and crashed. Just because you push back on the pressure, it's not going to go back up that same path. It's very unlikely. You may well have to push a little harder before the system has enough wherewithal to pop back up to where it was in terms of health. So don't be surprised if at the end of the TMDL people ask for more, because it's quite likely they will have to. And then maybe, as you go and people talk about trying to do new things, might want to, think about some things that we may be able to do in the future. So loads in groundwater, we haven't looked in a lot of detail at those. There may be ways to put the lagoon on some more exercise, harvesting drift algae. Not going to be the easiest thing to do, but may work. The rehabilitation of seagrasses is a big deal, and the district is looking at the seed banks, because that's where, as Lori will tell you, we think some of the recent recoveries come from. And then keep up with your checkups and preventions, so again, try to learn about how nutrients cycle, try to understand the phytoplankton. Try to look at where events happen, what does the system do. And, a model is a good way to capture all that. And so I hope you get about 10% of the value that this guy's going to get out of that lunch that he got himself.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Oh, I'm sorry. Here. Forgot my job.
Thank you. Is there any chance that they're going to start looking at salinity in addition to nutrients in the BMAP process? Reduction of freshwater going into the lagoon?
Not a lot, I don't think. Impairment for salinity is not something I've heard people do. Now, the district does look. For example, when they do the quote-unquote re-diversions, one of the things they do is say, well, maybe we don't want to re-divert all that water, right? We want to make sure that the lagoon gets enough fresh water as well. So, but I haven't heard of anyone having an impairment for salinity. So.
Aaron had a question.
Thanks, Chuck. Always good to see the summaries. Got a whole list of questions, but I'll just ask a couple. And this is coming from the perspective of the recreational fishing community. A lot of reports I get. I talk about some of these at the NEP meetings as well, but when you showed the sub-basins and the residence time of the water, one of the continuing points of confusion for me is that section from the Melbourne Causeway down to Sebastian Inlet. It should have a low residency time or high circulation, but if you run from, say, all the way down to Wabasso, all the way up to Port St. John's, that section from Long Point to the Melbourne Causeway is consistently the worst water color in the entire lagoon. So it's just kind of a throw out that the basin management is fantastic, but there's something else going on in that region, and that's a pretty significant region. It wasn't until last year, for example, that seagrass, and Lori can talk to this, came back around Sebastian Inlet, which gets tidal flow every day. So do you have any thoughts on that, how the committee might think about those?
So again, it's in a sense going to be the combination of loads and call it residence time, for lack of a better word. It's not one or the other, and that relationship's not likely to be linear, right? So it's going to be some complex relationship between the two, which may be what's driving pockets of of places where things happen. And salinity can play into that, all of those things. So to me, it's not a shock that you get these places where phytoplankton bloom more than others.
Right.
Seagrass recovery, that's because of the extent of the losses, that relatively strong coupling between light and seagrass may be a different relationship now. And there may be other factors that are entering into it, like disturbance. So, if the sediment moves too much, the seagrasses may not be able to recover as easily. So again, like at Sebastian, if you get a lot of tide, right? And so, again, these guys have to kind of overcome that if the bottom's shifting around. So, the relationships are multiple, not necessarily simple.
Okay, so a follow-up to that, and you kind of referred to it as far as TMDLs. If I understand correctly, the TMDLs are based on surface water flows, yeah?
Primarily, yes.
And so I think this was discussed a little bit at the last meeting. So our groundwater flows basically have a lot of legacy, right? So even if we stopped all the inputs from septics into the groundwater now, it's going to take decades for that to sort out. So are those, when we look at TMDLs, that's great, but there's that kind of underlying legacy that kind of get into your diet thing. You're great all week, but then you eat 3 pizzas on Saturday, and that's your legacy. How do we kind of look at that kind of longer term? Because if you look at Chesapeake Bay, Tampa Bay, it's been Chesapeake, what, 42 years before it actually recovered? So we have any thoughts on that type of shorter term, longer term?
So again, I think, the TMDL BMET process tried in my mind to capture the things that we knew were a major issue and address those. But it's an adaptive process, right? Nobody said, this is all you're ever going to have to do, amen. They said, this is what we're going to do first, right? And then we're going to look, and then we're going to see where we stand. And then we'll talk about what we have to do next. And like I pointed out at the end there, groundwater may be something that people want to work towards understanding, right? And you have here, right, as part of following up on projects. You're saying, well, did it make a difference to the groundwater? But you're right. I mean, what kind of legacy there is in groundwater, I'm not sure anybody knows for sure.
Right. I guess my overall point for both of those is the improvements are fantastic, but we have to keep in mind that it's a long-term, decades. We're working hard now, but we're talking decades of investment, which is a lot harder to sustain.
Sure. And, and remember, what you're working hard now on is fixing what happened 30, 40 years ago, right? What you need to probably think about in the future is, are we keeping pace with what's going on around us? So let's make sure we're not digging another hole. Like they say, if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. So.
I'm sorry?
Yeah. Laura Lee asked Dara's question about salinity. You mentioned the difference in phytoplankton in the lagoon. Are there other measures we should be gathering?
Other measures about the health?
Different than what we're getting today?
No, I think generally speaking, we have most of the metrics we need. The consistency, I think one of the things for understanding the lagoon is the duration. And so when you get an event like the 2011 super bloom, right, you don't have a way to look and compare it to another one, right? So, you have one. You go, well, okay, that's nice. Here's what we saw when we had that one, but does that hold if we have another one?
Well, that's an interesting point, because when I looked at the last year, the 2020, I thought to myself, could the reduction in fish kills be just because there are fewer in the lagoon to begin with?
It's possible.
And so it doesn't burst everybody's bubble and say, oh my gosh, look what it did. And just one final thing, just anecdotally, that study on dolphins was fascinating with the change in their diet. And I read the study, and I've noticed, this is anecdotal, my backyard, I'm catching or losing tons of ladyfish. And there are dolphin every day feeding in there. So I'm wondering if maybe we're beginning in that little bitty spot, as one anecdotal point, seeing some of that come back.
I mean, one would hope so. Again, I think the fish story is a little more complex than you might think at the start for both the independent monitoring and the dolphins, because it may just have been they shifted their location. So if the prey move into really shallow water, the dolphin can't get in there and get at them like they used to when the prey was out in deeper water where the seagrass was. And so again, that's the same with the net. That's perhaps why you saw a spike, because they shifted their distributions. So yeah, that's something we're still kind of working on.
Thanks.
Piecing it together.
Last question.
Nick?
Ken?
Following up off of the salinity questions, are there TMDLs, BMPs for fresh water that are already being monitored? About inputs, not groundwater, but runoff, stormwater runoff inputs, changes salinity because of that.
Again, I don't know of anybody who's been declared impaired because of too much fresh water.
I'm just thinking of clams and the high pulse of fresh water, the impact of clam reproduction.
Sure. Again, big pulses of fresh water certainly lead to short-term issues. Whether they lead to longer-term issues is probably a little more questionable. Okay. But yeah, again, I don't know of any impairments for that kind of issue.
Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Oh, wait.
One more. I'm sorry, Chuck.
No, you're good.
So on the map where you had the little circles for the continuous monitoring devices, it looked like the one that was on the Titus Pier was not on your map. Did that one, is it gone?
Still there. It takes a little bit of a reduced set of measurements. So it doesn't always make it into the set that we use to do some explanations.
Okay, thank you.
It's a little bit out of the main stem, and so a variety of reasons.
Thank you again. Appreciate it.
All right, our next speaker, Dr. Kate Hubbard, she's joining us virtually through Teams, so let's see if we can make the technology work.
I'm sorry, couldn't hear you, Virginia.
Our next speaker is joining us through Teams. She's not here physically. Oh, yay, there she is.
Can you hear us okay, Kate?
Thank you.
Can you hear us, Kate?
I can barely hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you good. Do you want to share your presentation? I can stop sharing screen and you share your screen.
She does, because she was making some changes.
Okay, okay.
Test, test.
We can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want to share your screen for your presentation?
Yeah, that would be great.
So while they work on the technology, you know, we should have done something to introduce Dr. Chuck Jacoby. As you could probably tell, he was the lead scientist for the Water Management District during the super bloom and leading researchers trying to figure out, you know, what that event was. More recently, he's gone to the Florida Flood Hub, but he is also continuing as a scientist for the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. Our next speaker, Dr. Kate Hubbard, is with Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, and she is the lead for the harmful algal bloom subsection, chair of the Florida Harmful Algal Bloom Task Force, and director of the Florida Wildlife Commission Center for Red Tide Research. So I'm still not seeing a shared screen.
Are you able to share your screen?
Yeah, I'll try to share my screen. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Thank you so much to Chuck for sort of setting the stage. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about some of the harmful algal bloom issues in the Indian River Lagoon, a little bit more about some of the different species that are causing these blooms, how we study them, and a little bit about how they thrive. I did include all of these titles up here, particularly that I chair the Florida HAB Task Force. We came together again as a task force in 2019, and we've been meeting ever since. And although we've been focusing on red tide, Coronia brevis issues since then, we have started to discuss working on other issues across the state of Florida, including those in the IRL. So with a focus on blooms in the IRL, there are a few things that can make an algal bloom harmful. One is simply the amount of biomass, as we saw with some of those super blooms. The other is that they can produce toxins, and those toxins can be harmful to human health. And then we have a few species that may be able to do both. And so we're really interested in trying to track those that are particularly harmful to the environment or to human health. But also, I just want to mention that a lot of algae, in fact, the vast majority of algae are not harmful. They're really important, as Chuck mentioned, for primary productivity, for acting as the base of the food web, for producing the air that we breathe. Algae are really, they're really awesome in terms of how they interact with their environment. And in terms of nutrients, algae can take up nutrients, but they also release nutrients, and they themselves can be a source of nutrients. And so there's a lot of complex dynamics there as we think about the different algae within the IRL. So we have a huge partner network that works on algal blooms in the IRL. These are just some of the different partners that are involved in that effort. And it's really these federal, state, regional, county, local partnerships that allow us to have such great coverage in the IRL. In terms of our work at the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, our work on harmful algal blooms is focused on monitoring and research. And a lot of the monitoring that we do is in support of the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. And they're the ones that manage shellfish harvest areas. And as you can see from the map on the left, there are a lot of different shellfish harvesting areas with different approval statuses at the moment. And we do a lot of the testing, the analytical testing on the phytoplankton, as well as on the toxins to be able to help inform those decisions by DAC. And a lot of the HABs that we work on, unfortunately, can produce toxins that require international or national management strategies, as well as state biotoxin contingency plans. And so we have several of those for the HABs that we work on in the Indian River Lagoon. And again, I want to emphasize this awesome partnership that we have, and there's just a lot going on and a lot of people involved. I will show you a little bit of the data just to illustrate some of the HAB issues that we faced over the past several years. And I want to take us back to the early 2000s when people started to get ill from eating pufferfish that were traced back to the Indian River Lagoon. And pufferfish actually do have their own toxin, tetrodotoxin, and this toxin is typically found in the liver and gonads. And so in order to eat pufferfish, there's very careful cleaning. Typically when people get sick from eating pufferfish, it's because the fish weren't accurately cleaned or adequately cleaned. But in this case, it was traced back to a different syndrome. And this syndrome was tied to a particular alga, Pyridinium bahamense. So this was one of the first HAB issues that really popped up in the IRL. And unlike most species of fish, the saxitoxins that are produced by this alga are actually concentrated in the fillets, the parts that the people are eating. And so this led to a permanent ban on harvest from pufferfish in the IRL. And so this was the first incident, and it sparked a lot of monitoring, especially for saxitoxin and the alga that produces it. So these are some pictures of Pyridinium bahamense. These blooms can make water discolored, slightly reddish or brown. This is actually a bloom in Old Tampa Bay. These blooms form in areas that have long residence times, so they're well acclimated to some of the subbasins of the Indian River Lagoon. They're one of several different types of things that can exist out in the lagoon that can cause bioluminescence. And so that's something where often during a bloom, there is quite a bit of bioluminescence. And if we look at observations, this is just showing one station in the Banana River over time. And what we see is that going back in time, we see cyclical summer blooms of this particular alga. And in some years, these blooms reach higher concentrations than others. And generally, we see blooms across the upper part of the Indian River Lagoon. I wanted to mention these summertime blooms occur in Old Tampa Bay, and we've started to see issues in Pine Island Sound as well. And one of the things that we track with Pyridinium is the presence of cells in the sediment, because cells, these are what in the upper part of that image are what the cells look like when they're in the water. But after a bloom, during a bloom, as conditions become less favorable, cells form these cysts or seeds, and those cysts sit in the sediment just like seeds do on land, and then they form the seeds for the next bloom the next year. And through studying these in the lab, we found out that they require a certain amount of chilling or cold, kind of like, again, like plants or bulbs. And once they've reached that amount of cold, then they can start to germinate and bloom the next year. A few things were kind of interesting with respect to pyridinium blooms in recent years. It is, again, very dependable in terms of being a summertime bloomer, but we saw that at least in 2023 and 2024, we had a few kinds of different things happening during the blooms. And one of those is that we saw a pretty intense bloom in the Titusville area. And that was something kind of unusual. It came with a lot of bioluminescence. And then last year, we really didn't have much of a bloom. And this was interestingly true in Old Tampa Bay as well. And so even though conditions in the past, in the summer, have always favored this, it suggests that there may be conditions shifting even more. It's hard to say. But I think it's important to point out that we have these cyclical algae, and since 2010, we've also experienced these super blooms, or occasionally maybe an extra super bloom. These super blooms can discolor the water. This is showing one of the brown tide events. And so as you can imagine, very little light is penetrating down to the seagrass. It also can reduce dissolved oxygen concentration, and that can cause a lot of issues in the water itself for fish, other organisms. And what we found with this particular type of algae is that it is very adept at using different types of nitrogen. It can pick up a lot of different forms of nitrogen. Often those forms are maybe recycled forms. And so that's probably one way that this organism is able to sustain itself for so long and reach such high densities. Now, this is the organism itself. So this is, if you say it looks like a lot of tiny little things, that's kind of what we say too. These are extremely difficult to identify, even under the microscope. And so we have to use a lot of different specialized approaches when we start dealing with these tiny algae. And one of the things that our group has done, and some of our other partners in the IRL have done, is really try to embrace these different monitoring tools so that we can get a quicker, easier handle on what's going on during an event. And particularly if we don't have an event, it allows us to use these tools in an early warning capacity. One of the things that we've seen with these brown tides, especially over the past few years, is that they may be able to compete with and or add to our seasonal pyridinium blooms. So Chuck mentioned the in situ continuous data that's hosted by the St. Johns River Water Management District. And I just want to mention what an awesome resource these instruments are. Having these sensors there allows us basically to do extremely intensive monitoring, high frequency monitoring from our offices. And that allows us to keep track on things like dissolved oxygen. And if we go to that time frame leading up to the fish kills in 2016, what we see is that we first saw really, really high levels of oxygen associated with that really dense bloom. And then we saw oxygen crash basically to zero. This allowed us to know basically what was happening, what was going on, what was causing the fish kill. But what caused the bloom to crash? It may have been simply that there was a set of cloudy days so that the bloom couldn't photosynthesize. Whether or not it reached nutrient capacity, we still have interesting questions related to these events that we have not yet answered. Of course, this was the fish kill. This was one of those images from that event. And just now overlaying some of the monitoring that we've been able to do since that event, we've been able to partner with the Fisheries Independent Monitoring Field Lab with FWC over in Melbourne to do intensive sampling at 8 or 9 sites throughout the Northern Lagoon each week. And these are showing results, again, just from one site. But now I've shown that cyclical red tide, Pyridinium bahamense over time. And then we see that the brown tide adds on to that. The cell concentrations on the brown tide are shown on the right-hand axis. They're much higher. The cells are much smaller. In spite of that, the biomass, the amount of algae is much greater. And we see that This bloom is quite big and even extended for quite a while. And I'm only showing the Banana River data here, but we did see this bloom impact other basins as well before it kind of petered out. Things have been pretty quiet in the Banana River over the past few years with respect to brown tide, which is amazing. I wanted to mention another type of alga that popped up. This was an alga that popped up in 2020 and caused green water discoloration. And this was something that ended up being a blue-green algae or cyanobacteria, so a completely different type of algae. And this was something novel that we hadn't really seen before. You can see some of that bloom extending in the satellite imagery over there. And it did turn the water pea green, soup colored. This bloom really picked up in the summer of 2020. And then it petered out by the time the winter came. And this was something, again, that we had never seen before. The normal way that we prepare samples made it look different than how it looked when it was alive. And so that was also a consideration. And again, these tiny cells, when you get a sample that looks like this, there's just so much going on. It can be really hard to identify them. We were able to use some different methods, some genetic methods to figure out which species this was. Then we were able to do sequencing of its genome, and we were able to figure out that most likely it has genes that allow it to take up nitrogen from the atmosphere. So in addition to potentially utilizing nitrogen from the water, it has that ability to bring nitrogen into the cells. And then when it releases its own exudates, that includes nitrogen that may be in forms that other algae can take up. And we were also able to use those different genetic approaches to adopt rapid identification tools so that we can quickly identify this particular type. Of course, this particular type really peaked in 2020, and we haven't seen it since. However, we're standing by ready in case it ever does happen again, and we're trained up, and we know. But it just adds to this complexity of these algal blooms, and it also points to how quickly, how dynamic things can change and shift. This one ended as temperatures started to decrease, so thankfully it was not a long-term bloomer, and again, it hasn't come back. I wanted to mention another type of algae that we monitor for in the Indian River Lagoon, Pseudonychia. Pseudonychia is a genus of diatoms that includes a lot of different species that basically look very similar to each other. We have to use genetic methods to tease them apart, so we just count cells for the most part, and we also screen for toxicity. And we do this as part of our biotoxin shellfish contingency plan with FDOCS, and this allows us, again, to keep a close watch on our shellfish harvest areas, as well as on these populations that, in terms of this toxin, Pseudonychia produces domoic acid. Only some species are known to produce this toxin, and it can cause issues in marine mammals. There has been an ongoing event on the West Coast where sea lions have been impacted, and although low levels of domoic acid had been observed in the IRL and in some of the marine mammals on the East Coast, again, the levels that we see in the IRL are very, very low. One thing, I know there's been discussion of salinity, and Pseudonychia is a marine diatom, and it does tend to do better in more marine conditions. And so often when we see it thriving, conditions tend to be saltier. So again, just adds to this overall matrix of different algal blooms that can be in the Indian River Lagoon. This particular one isn't particularly bad when it's not toxic. And so I think one of the things to look at is that after we've had this series of super blooms and anomalous blooms with really discolored water, we've had a past few years that have been really good. And so that has been awesome. We have all of these tools ready to go, but at the same time, we'd much rather not have to use them. And so I just wanted to mention, in terms of where we go from here, I think that with respect to these different phytoplankton and their dynamics, the episodic and event scale nature, as well as the interannual variability that we see, are really important. And again, these algae are coupled to their environment, but they also can change their environment. And so the restoration and management strategies have to account for that variability. With the different types of algae that we see, they have different threats in terms of how they interact with the ecosystem. They also have different interactions with respect to nutrients. And I think there are still some gaps that we have in terms of understanding linkages between nutrients and phytoplankton. I think that there are other gaps in terms of understanding some of the benthic algae in the lagoon and in other estuaries across Florida. And that's something that we're actively working on trying to improve. So again, there's a lot to think about in terms of where we go from here, a lot of different types of algae. And although I spoke about a lot of individual types of algae that we focus on, it's also important to recognize that none of these algae exist on their own. They're always existing in a community. And so we have other tools, other approaches that allow us to study either the individuals or the community in a whole. And I just want to really highlight how routine monitoring with a toolbox makes a difference. It allows us to have the appropriate resolution and space and time to get a handle on what's going on in terms of event response, but then also to start looking at drivers and impacts and thinking about innovative strategies for resource management. And I really want to highlight how having the in situ monitoring sensors that the district maintains, as well as the routine phytoplankton monitoring that's been going on for a long time through the district, the NEP, and others. Satellite imagery has been a really awesome advance and allows us to have that, again, really high frequency handle on what's going on. It's not everything, and there can be cloudy days that obscure what's happening in the lagoon. But I think it's something that, especially with some of the new satellite advances coming out, will allow us to get a better handle on who's blooming where. And then finally, I just wanted to share an example. So going back to 2016, my mom actually has a condo on the Banana River. And going back to that 2016 event and some of the other blooms, we had my mom collecting samples for us. And I was quickly processing those samples, doing DNA sequencing in the lab. But it was still something that was not instantaneous, was not routine. And this past year, we started to see an increase in what seemed to be Oriamber lagunensis or brown-tide lake cells in the Mosquito Lagoon. And we have indeed started to track a little bloom there. And we were able to run these samples very quickly using a fluorescent antibody and a special automated cytometer. And we were able to even take pictures of them. And this all in the span of just a few hours. And so I think our ability to respond to these events and to have a better handle on what's going on is improving in leaps and bounds. And again, I think that goes hand in hand with a lot of the efforts put into restoration. And with that, I'll just say, again, it takes a huge network. I'm really grateful to be a part of that network. And it's always something where I hope that we don't have to work on any harmful algal bloom issues, but continuing to work on just algal blooms and algae in the IRL. I'll pause and stop sharing my screen.
Questions for Kate? Laura Lee.
So the bloom that's starting in the Mosquito Lagoon right now, I see it because I water test up there every week, and I've been watching the water turn greener and greener. Is it going to get worse, or what do you think is going to happen with that bloom?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I do not know the answer to that. Just looking back historically, sometimes these things can kind of pick up and then taper off. Sometimes they can last for a long time, and we're still at the beginning, so it's hard to say.
Other questions?
Let me ask one quick one. I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you very much. The warnings you give in terms of being able to monitor now, that's about as far as you can go, I think. It's up to us to do something here in response to that. When you say we have tools ready to go, you're talking about monitoring and warnings and alerts and that sort of thing. I'm not seeing that if you start to see a bloom coming, there's not like a bloom squad that you can have go out and stop the bloom. I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression that this is something that, can be instantly cured by knowing it's coming. Is that a fair assessment?
It is a fair assessment. I think that we'll hear a little bit more about that with one of the later speakers. I think that given the nature of some of these different types of algae and where they are in the water column, whether or not they may have a stage that resides in the sediment, there are likely different strategies that might be helpful for each. And I think that at least where the research is right now, trying to understand how a treatment may be focused enough to alleviate the stress that the algal bloom causes but doesn't cause other issues. I think that's a really delicate balance. And just given how quickly things can turn over, it is very possible that another algae will come to thrive after you deal with first algae. And so I think that it is something that trying to understand their biology, their life history, how they interact with the nutrients. It's another strategy for thinking about how you might be able to control them through improved management. So if you can kind of take away some of the things that they need to grow and thrive before they turn into a big bloom.
One more,
Quick
go
question on
ahead.
that. I know they could be testing these LG Sonic devices. If those prove workable, might we be able to deploy those knowing an area is starting to bloom as a bloom thing?
Right, potentially. So I think to Kate's point, the more we know about what makes them bloom, what conditions allow them to bloom, and what conditions the bloom collapses, the better we can target technologies to address the issue.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
Kate, you mentioned
Can I
pyrodinium.
just comment on that
Sure.
Yeah.
briefly? Sorry, I just wanted to mention that with some of the sonic devices, I think that there still needs to be some work on how they interact with marine mammals, in particular with manatees.
Yeah.
And so I haven't seen that research yet, and I just wanted to mention that, just to add on.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut off somebody.
No, you're right on target. When I interviewed them about a year ago, when they first had the announcement, and I talked to their lead scientist, I had the same exact question. And he's claimed they've been used in areas with marine mammals and not seen any results, but their range of that fits right in the range of a dolphin's. So it's certainly a great question. I don't know if it does anything yet. We should find out. If it does, obviously you got a problem.
Kate, you mentioned pyrodinium and that it's likely caused some of the toxins in the pufferfish. If I remember correctly, pyrodinium is also a factor in paralytic shellfish poisoning in shellfish. So to what extent might this impact potentially the clam aquaculture we have going on in the lagoon?
So generally, given that that is a summer bloom, we do have closures in those lease areas each year. We try to work really carefully with DACs to manage those closures and try to open as soon as we're able to. And so a lot of the testing that we do is to try to support reopening.
Any other? We thank you. We've enjoyed it, and we appreciate the effort you've gone to. I know it's a little difficult when you're remote, but we thank you.
Likewise. Thank you.
That's great.
Let's see, next we have, oh, she's getting up already.
I think Terry's just going to pull up the presentation, but Lori Morris is here from the Water Management District, and actually she's just drying out from spending a week swimming in the lagoon along transects, examining the seagrass and the state of affairs out there. So thank you, Lori.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the invitation to speak. So I chose to be last because I'm hoping I can wrap up a lot of the last two projects. So at first I want to go over see how we monitor seagrasses in the lagoon, give you a little status and trend of that, and then kind of give you an ecosystem view of what's going on with our main primary producers. And then a little bit of update on some current projects that are helping for future restoration. So let's get into it. So we kind of monitor our seagrasses on a two-tier approach, meaning a large scale and a finer scale. So we do our lagoon-wide aerial mapping that you're all familiar with. We fly and we can see a picture, and from the air we can map the seagrass bed. So we map that extent of the bed. And that is done in cooperation with funding from DEP and the South Florida Water Management, because we do a lagoon-wide view of that. And so from that, you get this footprint. But what it doesn't give us is it doesn't give us what's going on inside that seagrass footprint. You're not getting the quality of the seagrass. You're not getting the type of species. We do have 7 species of seagrass. So back in 1994, Bob Bernstein and I set up our fixed seagrass in water transect program to try to help give us that information of the percent cover and what's actually happening in that bed. Like Chuck was mentioning, the hairs on his head. So from that program, again, that is another lagoon-wide program, but at a much finer scale because we're in the water. So in there, we have monitoring our 7 species. We're collecting seagrass cover and occurrence. We do canopy height, all non-destructive sampling because we didn't want to be the impact of the sampling and the impact of these seagrass beds. We do it twice a year, every summer and winter. We also are collecting the drift macroalgae and a caulerpa, another type of macroalgae. We keep track of those separately, and you'll see how and why in a little bit. So here are our 100 dots of all the places where we have been monitoring. And again, this is also a multi-agency cooperation. We do not, you often hear it referred to as the water management's transects. They're not. They're everybody's transects. There's many agencies helping. We cannot do this alone. We do monitor, we do manage the data for it. Nobody else wanted to take on that task. So here's the data from it. So I'm hopefully this graph is familiar. A lot of people present it. We share it with everybody so that you can get that status and trend of the seagrass as a whole. So looking at the green bars, that is coming from our mapping data. So that would be on the left-hand scale using hectares. And then the black and the gray lines come from the transect data. And you can see that the mapping data isn't done every year, every 2 to 3 years, but the transects are. So the transects allow us to have that information every year to fill in those blanks if there are. And as the mapping data, the total transect length, because we always go from shore to the deep edge of the bed, complement each other. They, you can see they follow the same track, and so we have that to show us how things are going in between, so we're not missing stuff on our off-mapping years. And then the bottom line, the gray line, is what's the quality of the bed, the percent cover, how much grass we have within that footprint. And you clearly see the bloom events that have occurred starting in 2011 and the crash in the seagrass. We've had some up and down, as we call our flickering events, and how the beds have occurred throughout the time. And luckily, we're starting to see that little upswing. So the transects can take us till last year. We are mapping in 2025, the contract's in place, and with these clear skies we're having right now and the water's still clear, we're hoping they're flying very soon. But to give you an idea, Chuck kind of showed you some of these maps. So this was some of our peak maps, the footprint that you saw in 2009. And you can see how the seagrass coverage, it pretty much takes over that shoal area, that shallow. These plants require light. So the light usually in the lagoon, about less than 2 meters, right? So 1.5, 1 meter or so is about where we have seagrass. And luckily, the lagoon has these vast shallow areas. And so that's where the seagrass covers. So there's 2009, and Chuck kind of showed you what you're gonna see for 2023. So you see that massive loss of seagrass in there. And luckily we have Mosquito Lagoon, which has shown some of that the higher recovery. And then when you look further south, we see a little more recovery in the bottom. So that's something to think about. When we see of areas recovering, it's not recovering. When we see these increasing numbers, it's not recovering the same everywhere. So if we kind of break that into what we call sub-lagoons, into, sections of the lagoon into big chunks, the last 2 mapping years, you can see some of our highest gains in recovery of seagrass have been in the north in Mosquito Lagoon, a little bit in North IRL, and then down towards the southern parts of the lagoon. And so, you have to still think that central region is still really having a lot of stressors. And taking that same kind of look now, looking in the transects and looking at the quality, the percent cover of the seagrass in those beds at the same time, you can kind of see same kind of sublagoons broken out with all my dots and the data coming from there. Looking towards the last couple of years, we see how we're seeing increases. And so in here, we have the 2024, so you have beyond the mapping. So you can see we have a little bit more recovery in Mosquito. We're starting to see Banana light up. We're starting to see North IRL come back, and then the Southern IRL as well. That central is what kind of we talked about a little bit from Chuck and Kate was mentioning, that from Cocoa down to just north of Sebastian, Grant area, that's where that north central IRL is where we're having our slowest return. But when you look at this graph and you look at the areas where we are seeing seagrass, we never completely 100% lost seagrass in those areas, right? So there was something to come back from. It's a little easier to come back when you have some shoots still out there than compared to that central area where we've had 0 for a number of years now. So that's where this little lagging behind is probably happening, because it's harder to come back from nothing. So now I want to kind of take you into that whole ecosystem look. And so we know the system has kind of work together with seagrasses and drift algae and phytoplankton. There are 3 main primary producers out there. And we know they've all played and competed for nutrients during different times, and we've seen that from the past 2 presentations. So I just want to bring up this kind of classic graphic from a number of years ago, and it goes back, many people have used it as kind of a model for the system. So if we're looking at trying to have a macrophyte-based system of seagrasses, you kind of have to have lower nutrients and high light to have those seagrasses dominated. But unfortunately, as we have increasing nutrients over time and causing that decrease in light for the plants, we see that there can be a flip in the system from seagrasses to a more phytoplankton system. So all three of them were present, and they're just competing with each other. And so when I kind of look at our data and how that works, we kind of see that that's a little bit of what happened out there. So in the 90s and early 2000s, we had a seagrass-dominated system. So here what I've done is I've taken my seagrass data from my transects and the drift algae data that I collect in the transect, converted all to carbon, and those are on the left-hand scale. On the right-hand scale, I have the phytoplankton biovolume that is collected by Dr. Ed Flips at the University of Florida. And so that is in cubic meters on the right-hand side. And so you can see the seagrass is our dominant. We were a seagrass-dominated system, with the drift algae and the phytoplankton being the lower players. But right there in 2011, we saw that flip in the system. And we started losing the seagrasses, and the phytoplankton became more dominant. And then we have that flickering of the competition between seagrasses and phytoplankton and who was winning. And you can see in 13, 14, 15, seagrasses and drift tried to come in. And then we had that 16 brown tide that we've been talking about. And then later on, they keep trying, they keep competing. And then the big one, which I kind of say the super duper bloom, because these last two were so much bigger than the original one that we thought was horrific. But then we get to the bottom here, these last couple of years, and as everyone said, we're getting less blooms, and we're seeing some of the seagrass come back. But what I want you to look at now is kind of think about it. If I could stack our three primary producers and hypothetically kind of stack them and add them all up, it looks like the system holds a certain amount of carbon there. Who's getting it and what's going on, and keeping it as seagrass or phytoplankton. And that all seems to work except for these last couple of years. They just don't seem to add up. We're having lower blooms, the seagrass is coming back, but it's just not to the extent that we had seen before. So if you're familiar with what's going on out in the lagoon, a lot of the bottom right now is covered with a different macroalgae. It's Caulerpa prolifera. And prolifera is meaning, in his name, it is prolific. And it's very opportunistic. So we're pretty sure Caulerpa is what is filling that niche right now. So what we've been able to do in our 2023 map, so I've kind of cropped our 2023 here to Brevard County. So at the time when we were finishing our maps, FWC had some extra funding, and they wanted to do a project, and we said we would love to see if we can map our Caulerpa beds, because they act like seagrass. You can see them from the air. They're dense coverage. If you've been out on boats, you know how dense that coverage is out there. So as a pilot project, we did this, and we actually, the same people that do our seagrass maps were given the time and money to do our Caulerpa maps, and we actually have more Caulerpa than we had seagrass present in 2023. So if I put those two together on the same map, you can kind of see, where our seagrass is and where that Caulerpa is. I'm going to bring up that 2009 again, and now you see that Caulerpa has very happily taken over that footprint and just taken advantage of it. It loves the open space, and it loves being able to go in there. So, Caulerpa, the main thing you need to know about Caulerpa is it's not an invasive species. Caulerpa has been around forever out there. And any of you Brevard County people that remember Conrad White, when I first started here, Conrad was studying Caulerpa. And there was a lot of Caulerpa out there in the early 90s then, and I think even the 80s when he was really getting into it. So it's kind of been this boom and bust kind of species that comes and goes and takes advantage of open space. So going back to here, looking at my graph one more time, I'm pretty sure I can fill that circle with Caulerpa, showing how much we have out there, and to be able to make my graph balance out. So, to be continued, because I don't have a carbon number for Calerepa. I'm trying to get Harbor Branch, some of the people down there, to help me get that carbon number so that I can add a new line. So, to be continued on that one. So let's talk about more Calerepa. Okay, I already mentioned it's non-invasive. It's very opportunistic. It has good and bad qualities. It has some similar ecosystem services like seagrasses. It's very good at taking up nutrients. And I believe it had a lot to do with why the water's so clear these last couple of years. It loves nitrogen. It's a good green macroalgae. And it's also, because it's attached on the bottom, it looks like it's rooted, but it's not. It's not a plant, it's an algae. But it's actually on the bottom providing that stabilization of the sediments and not allowing, I keep hitting that, not allowing, see I'm Italian, right? Not allowing that resuspension of the sediments. So it offers a lot of those services. Now, bad, is it out competing? Is it causing the seagrasses in some areas to not be able to recover? And so this is one of the projects that we're working with now. We're working in collaboration with UCF and Brevard Zoo with funding from Moat Marine Lab. And one of the students there is, she's doing some mesocosm work over in the Hub SeaWorld out in Melbourne Beach. And so she's testing these thresholds of how much Calerepa can be present and be able to plant Haliduli is the main species we're working with, into the mesocosms. And now, just last month, she's now trying it in the field. So this is something that we're trying to look into. We're trying to see, if too much Calerepa is there or not, and is there an inhibition. But meanwhile, it is providing some services in the lagoon. And so it has its pluses and minuses. One of our other projects that we're working on is our seeds. Trying to find out, is there a seed bank? Because if there is, if we can find these hot spots of seeds for our seagrass species, then maybe that's where we tell people you don't need to do a restoration project. The area is going to come back. And that's pretty much what we think is going on in Mosquito Lagoon. Because the way Mosquito Lagoon came back so quickly, it had to have been seed. There's no way fragments could have been running around and shooting out there and increase the amount of seagrass coverage out there. It had the footprint, but the percent cover went from like 5% to 50, 60% in just a year or two. So those seeds just turned on and everybody's happy out there, and we're seeing large flowering events. So the seed project is funded by DEP, and it's working with Dr. Austin Fox and his team, and our group at St. John's is working. And we just got a second-year funding now to continue doing this throughout the whole lagoon. So now we're going to go down into the South Florida area and work in there, because typically we just work in the St. John's area. But again, we're going at every one of our transects where we have long-term data to understand how the recovery is happening in those areas. And just to show you, these are flowering plants that are now living underwater, the seagrasses. So Haliduli, here's a picture of a Haliduli flower. Haliduli, there's male and female plant. The flowers are on different plants. Now Rupia is dioecious, and it has both male and female on the same shoot. And so you can see the difference. Haliduli may only produce 1 or 2 seeds, whereas the Rupia can produce 8 to 10 seeds. So in our study right now, we're finding a lot of Rupia seeds, and the Haliduli seems to be a little more elusive. But obviously it's out there because the way we're seeing recovery in a lot of these areas. So this will produce hotspot maps that will be going towards restoration projects and helping to let people go, yeah, this is where we might need some extra help, but don't worry about planting over here, because that's probably not an area it's gonna recover on its own once we get those water quality conditions. So just kind of to wrap it all up, we are seeing seagrass recovering, but it isn't happening everywhere equally lagoon-wide. The main thing is reducing those nutrients, trying to get the water quality right so the seagrass can recover on its own. Caulerpa, we know, is non-invasive. It's bed-forming, goods and bads, beneficial, and we're still going to work to see if we can find that threshold for tolerance for impeding any recovery of the seagrasses, and gathering more information on the seeds. So just to put a smiling face to all the people that help us collect some of this data, I'll just leave you with that, and I would be more than happy to try and answer your questions. Thank you.
Questions?
That was great, Lori, thank you. So when the seagrass really came back in Mosquito Lagoon, it seemed like it coincided with dune washovers that occurred during hurricanes. Also, the recovery that's in the northern Indian River Lagoon, that seems to be coinciding with drought conditions. Do you think that the salinity might have something to do with the seagrass?
I just knew you were going to push me on that. I do think that for seeds, the thing about flowering and seeds, some of the things we are learning, there's things that trigger. We all know, we all have plants, right? There's different parts of a season or different parts of the weather that trigger bloom, flowering events of your plants. Well, I do believe we're seeing a lot of our seagrass species. Yesterday I was in Mosquito Lagoon. I had Halophila anglemanii, haliduli, and rupia flowering everywhere. So there's seeds going on. The salinity was about 30 parts per thousand. The ocean is 35. Right? A lot of the lagoon is usually about 20 to 25, but we like to keep it above that, right? So I do think that some of that pop of those seeds there was lots of light, the salinity, all the water quality conditions were just right. And it's interesting how it happened in Mosquito Lagoon first, and then Northern IRL the next year, and Northern Banana as well. And we were watching the salinity come up during that time. But a lot of it was clear water, too. So.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Two for you today. So with the seagrass being replanted at the scale that it's being replanted in the lagoon, and you mentioned the difference in how they produce seed with the haliduli, the plantings that are happening, how much percentage is that male-female? Are they planting male grasses or female grasses or both?
Very good question. We actually just did get a report from the plants that they have in the nursery over at Hubs that the Brevard Zoo manages, and right now they're all male plants. They're all male flowers. And what that could mean is when they planted the nursery, they used fragments, right? And they planted them. And so they're clones. The fragments are clones, you have a rhizome. It looks very like St. Augustine grass, right? So you have a rhizome and you have all your shoots coming up. And it could be that they just happened to be that way. Now, I did find a female flower in Mosquito Lagoon yesterday. But we are finding more male flowers right now. But it could be a timing thing. Maybe they have to come up first and the female,
Right.
There's so much. I've been out here 32 years and I know nothing. I am just amazed. The whole flowering shoots and seeds, it's not something we paid attention to when we had so much seagrass. And now it's such an important thing and we're all learning. Because it produces only that 1 to 2 seeds, it's very hard to find them.
Well, we'll hope that there's a seed bank existing for the males to get to. For my second question, talking about seagrass and through the tourism kind of lens of this, where do you see the value of programs like the Eyes on Seagrass program that's happening soon? Might want to tell people about that.
Oh.
Get out there and help count seagrasses. Is there a model that can be maybe used or to collect data from an ecotourism perspective, of people that visit the area, is there a role to be had from a professional standpoint that maybe people that come in could either count seagrasses, collect it on the app, like the Eyes on Seagrass program is kind of, starting to do. And then maybe is there a future where they can harvest callirpa if they're on vacation and they were given the right program through the right organization to go out there and say, hey, this is callirpa, you've identified it, you've become a citizen scientist, can you collect some of that callirpa, get those nutrients out of the lagoon in a safe, scientifically educated manner? Is there a role for that in the future, maybe, through your experience?
There could be. The Eyes on Seagrass is a good test. So we are working with, this is with an IFSC grant, and they're trying it. It is well used on the West Coast. They use it in Tampa Bay and Sarasota Bay. And what it is just basically citizens out on their boats or maybe actually swimming in the water. Scientists aren't the only weirdos always getting out of the boat. And getting in there and just documenting presence, absence of the seagrass. And so we timed this one. They had done it, they tried it in the fall, but we're timing this one with our aerial photography this time. So we're flying any day now, and we're hoping we can use those for extra ground truthing points. And so anything like that is always helpful, especially during our mapping years, to get more eyes out there to see, because we're not getting, it's very hard to get everywhere. But it's good to have that quality index of what actually is present there instead of just the quantity and the mapping footprint extent. So
I'm trying to find a date for it.
I think it starts May 1st. I think
Real
it's,
soon, right? Yeah.
I think it runs the whole month of May. Because I was out last week and I was like, should I be documenting this now? But it doesn't open, I'm pretty sure it doesn't open till May 1st.
May 1st through the 31st, yep.
Right. So IFSC grant. Callirpa's a tricky one. It's doing something. It's taking up nutrients. If it's not there, who's going to take up the nutrients? The seagrasses aren't going to grow back that fast.
Right.
So who's our other primary producer who's going to win? We all don't want the phytoplankton.
Gracilaria, maybe?
Gracilaria might be another option. That's the drift macroalgae that you all smell in the fall, when it washes up.
Well, if we remove that, that'd be good for tourism too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Just quickly, how far have you gotten with looking for these seed beds within that mapping thing? And are there areas elsewhere that you're actually finding some, or are they just devoid of it?
No, we've done the entire, so that the project started last June, and we did a one-time at every one of our sites, and then we did 30 sites quarterly to see if there was a seasonal aspect, and we're just now finishing the last quarter. The report's due to DEP in June again, and there definitely are hot spots. Where we have seagrass is where we're finding haliduli seeds. Rupia seeds seem to be more throughout the lagoon, and rupia will sprout up, but it's very flashy. Rupia is an odd one. It's an opportunistic, kind of very flashy pioneer species, so it will bloom and kind of then die back. But most of the time it blooms, got some seed, and then will come back when the conditions are good. So it's still hard, even in some of these beds where we know we have seagrass, we core for seeds, and we're lucky if we get one. Because, we got a 10-centimeter core and we've got a kilometer of seagrass and we're trying to plug a hole. It's a needle in the haystack. So we're still working on, are we coring enough too? So.
We thank you.
Sure, you're very welcome.
You're very
Thank you.
enthusiastic.
I do love seagrass.
Well done.
You okay?
Yeah.
Or
I'm pushing
do you want to wait? Okay, we're going
Thank you.
to, hang on a second.
Okay, I'm going to present about a 2-second video. I had taken a video at my dock this past Sunday of how clear the water is and the callirpa, and I had sent it to Virginia and Dwayne and a lot of other people. And it was suggested that maybe it would be good for you folks to look at. It's just my property is about 2 miles south of the Pineda Causeway.
Oh.
Let me bring this up, so. There we go. Logan can focus on it. You got it? There we go.
Which side?
This is on the west side, and I've got about 6 feet of depth in the water, and it's really clear, and there's a ton of clariva. I mean, it's everywhere. But the amazing thing to me is that as recently as probably about 3 years ago, I thought I was never going to see the bottom again, because we had just gotten so much mud and whatever, and silt, and it was just so thick on the bottom that I thought I'll never see a white sandy bottom again, and gosh, here we go. And so everybody involved with this can pat themselves on the back.
And I think, you also pointed out that the wind had been blowing for
Oh, good.
a couple weeks, and you can see the
Yeah,
flags blowing there.
that's the
right?
other
So-
thing.
Yeah.
Typically, when we have wind events, it stirs up the mud, and you just don't see a recovery. And the wind stopped, and the next day it was clear. So
That's good.
you've done a great job. Okay, that's show and tell for today.
Well done, Kurt.
And I gotta get.
Where am I, young lady?
Good morning. I'm Aaliyah Adaman. I'm an environmental specialist with the SORL program, and I'm going to be telling you about remote sensing and innovative controls for harmful algal blooms. So in 2021, Brevard County was awarded an innovative technology grant from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and we selected the use of remote sensing technologies as a cost-effective and encompassing approach to identify harmful algal bloom formation quickly. And this is kind of leading towards what Kate was talking about, quick, real-time data that we are getting from satellite images. So Applied Ecology developed and analyzed and implemented the protocols for using the imagery from the Sentinel-2 and 3 satellites to map HABs in Indian River Lagoon. And it's using the reflective wavelength from chlorophyll A to determine algal abundance. These maps are an example of what is sent out weekly through our HAB newsletter and posted on our story map. So the image on the left is what we send out each week. The legend in the bottom left corner shows you what you're looking at. So the neon green, bright green color is submerged aquatic vegetation. So the seagrass and caulerpa, this you can kind of see lines up pretty accurately with what Lori just presented. And below that is the estimated chlorophyll A concentration on a color scale from blue to yellow, then red, showing an increase in concentration. So on this map, you see it's mostly blue and some light yellowish color, which would indicate really low level blooms. So while we get those maps weekly, quarterly, this graph is updated from Applied Ecology, which gives us the median monthly estimated chlorophyll A concentrations divided up by basin. So we can see that, the different basins may not always be responding the same way. You can see that in 2020, there was that spike everywhere except in Central. So this just gives us long-term data divided by the basin. This project also looked at how HABs varied by location over time, and different indices were created to address this question. So we have the bloom duration index, which is essentially just how long the bloom lasts, the duration of the bloom. The bloom intensity index is the chlorophyll concentration. So again, back to that map and that color scale, what's the concentration micrograms per liter of the bloom? And then these two indices combined form our bloom severity index, which estimates the potential harm caused by long-lasting high concentration blooms at a given location. And many hypotheses were developed during the startup of this project to try and identify patterns in bloom activity. So the first hypothesis was have intensity, scale, and duration been increasing throughout the Indian River Lagoon? And this hypothesis appeared to be correct for certain segments, such as the North IRL and Northern Central IRL. Hypothesis 2 was, do HABs occur more frequently in proximity to large stormwater outfalls? For this hypothesis, applied ecology was unable to identify locations in the IRL that were in the same region that didn't have the same number of stormwater outfalls. So this hypothesis was not able to be evaluated, but they did find a significant relationship between the lack of stormwater runoff and an increased median severity index. So this suggests that for these segments of the IRL, increased bloom activity may occur during dry periods when there's little to no flow from the stormwater outfalls. For hypothesis 3, there was no clear conclusion able to be drawn on whether HABs occur more frequently in proximity to locations with on-site sewage treatment and disposal systems. And same for hypothesis 4, no significant relationship was found between either the abundance or absence of submerged aquatic vegetation and the bloom duration index. Hypothesis 5 and 6 are both related to muck, and both appear to be accurate for the Ogali River, where the bloom severity index was much lower following dredging operations. And this graph gives you a visual representation of that data that supports those last two hypotheses. You can see that the bloom severity index before and during dredging, before that green line, was significantly higher than after dredging. Again, we're using the satellite imagery for a variety of different projects, and just showing that we're using it to monitor and assess the projects that we're funding through the Soil Plan. And we continue to ask questions. So the initial startup of this project was funded through FDEP, but Soil continues to pay for the weekly reports through our monitoring fund. And again, continuing to ask questions like, does bloom activity relate to observed fish kills? Understanding the conditions that result in large fish kills can help clarify management interventions and protect their potential to occur. The second set of questions is looking at IRL bloom activity related to weather patterns such as wind. And the third question is looking at muck presence, looking at proposed dredge locations such as Titusville Railroad, NASA Causeway, Rockledge, and Ogali, and comparing it to sandy benthic conditions. And then, so where you can get this data, so if you go to the Soil website and click on the Maps tab on the right-hand side, that blue tab, and scroll down to the fourth panel there, there's a link to subscribe to our newsletter. So you can click on that link, put your email, first and last name, and click the blue button at the bottom to sign up and stay informed. If you are signed up for our newsletter, but you don't feel like looking through your emails, you can also go to our story map, which is that second link on that same tab. That basically has a summary of what's going on currently. So this is, again, managed by Applied Ecology. There's the project description, current HAB conditions for both the Sentinel-2 and Sentinel-3 satellite. And then there's also a sliding tool that shows you the previous week and compares it to the current week. So you can see here, the left-hand side is April 4th, a little bit more of that yellowish color indicating low-level blooms. And on the right-hand side, April 13th, where it's much more blue, showing on the map, which means that we had a decrease in blooms for that segment. And then there's additional graphs here, again showing the same data in just a different format and the categorizing it based on whether it's a low level, mid level, or high level bloom. Or you can scan the QR code right now and sign up for the newsletter right now. So overall, this project was able to validate a suite of remote sensing tools that can be applied to the IRL for rapid and detailed assessments of bloom activity. The satellite images can provide regular assessment, and again, it's real-time data, and it's available to the public, so the public has access to this as well. And again, while FDEP funded the startup of this project, Soil continues to fund the weekly reports through our monitoring fund. All right, now I'm going to talk to you about a couple of our innovative technology grants that we have been awarded and how we can use those to mitigate harmful algal blooms. So the first project, so in 2022, we received another innovative tech grant to test the barge-mounted algae harvester with AECOM. This technology had been successful in freshwater and enclosed systems, so we received funding from FDP to test this technology and do a pilot test in the open lagoon in our brackish water conditions. Again, I just want to highlight that the satellite imagery from the first project was used with this project in order to identify locations where HABs were forming in order to determine where to move the barge. It was always ground truth with chlorophyll A probes, but we would use it kind of as an indicator of where we should look for higher bloom activity. So the system operated for 5 work weeks between 4 locations in the Indian River Lagoon between September and November, and this infographic illustrates how the technology works. So the water is pumped into a series of chambers where different purification chemicals condition the water, causing the algae and other solids to come together or coagulate and form what we call floc. And then nanobubbles were added to the system, causing the floc to float to the surface, and then a skimmer was used to skim that floc out into a collection tank. The process does not damage the algae cells, therefore the nutrients and toxin in the cells are removed from the water in addition with the cells, or with the algae. This project had a lot of obstacles such as fluctuating water conditions, variable algae levels, low dissolved oxygen, and wave action, which did impact the overall performance. We also didn't have any major blooms during the duration of this project, so when there's not really a lot of algae to remove to begin with, you know, it's going to impact your results a little bit. So the data shown here do show that we have some reductions in important parameters such as chlorophyll A, total phosphorus, and total nitrogen, but again, these removal efficiencies were quite low. Aside from the low values presented here, we found that the application of this technology in the lagoon also had many challenges. So the barge is large and takes a while to move. HABs are dynamic and move as well. So oftentimes by the time the barge reached the location, the targeted location, the HABs had moved or shifted, or the water conditions were just different than what we had originally thought. So since the lagoon is an open and very large system, the cost effectiveness of this project didn't really seem feasible for us. And again, just wanted to reiterate that this was completely funded through FDP's Innovative Technology Grant. The second project is the one that we are currently working on, looking at ultrasonic transducers in algal treatment. Again, we were using the satellite imagery to identify a good location for this project. So, you know, the Banana River area has high severity index, and especially up in the Sykes Creek here. And then our project site is just north of where that map is cut off. We are testing the efficacy of this technology in the open water lagoon with our estuarine species and conditions, and again, funded by the Innovative Tech Grant through FDP. The canals in Sykes Creek are a great location, not only because we know that there are frequent and intense blooms in this area, but the canals create semi-similar environments where we can create a controlled experiment. So some of our canals have the transducers, other canals do not, so that we have treatment canals and control canals to test the technology. And I also just want to shout out and thank all the homeowners who have agreed to participate and are letting us hang our equipment from their docks during the duration of this study. So where are we right now with this project? So at the end of December, we had finished setting up all the equipment. So all the ultrasonic transducers and water quality monitoring sondes have been installed. And we are out there every 2 weeks taking chlorophyll A readings. So we are waiting for a target threshold of 20 micrograms per liter of chlorophyll A before we will say what we call activate, which is when we will turn on the ultrasonic transducers, we'll take water samples, we'll come back after a few days, turn them off, take more water samples, and that will be what we're using to determine whether this technology works or not. When the transducers are turned on, they will cycle through a range of frequencies that are supposed to burst the gas vacuole in the algae cell, causing them to sink to the bottom where they can no longer photosynthesize and will die. So we are expecting to complete this project by the end of this year and should have a report by mid next year. We haven't activated yet, so kind of what with the clear water. It's been a little bit cooler this year, so we haven't hit our target. And again, that 20 micrograms per liter was determined by a robust literature review, and it's also what Applied Ecology in those graphs on their story map is the beginning of a mid-level bloom. So we're waiting to hit that target before turning anything on. And with that, I will take any questions.
Questions? Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks.
Yeah, that area is fascinating, that's where I happen to live up here. And just 2 days ago, I was fishing with a buddy. That northern marker you have, that northern area, is really, sorry. I live in that area, so that northern, I went fishing 2 days ago, that northern marker is super cloudy up there. I'm not sure what's going on, but the other two are crystal clear, just like Kurt showed. So I don't know how long it's going to take for you to be able to do that and get those numbers, but could you maybe look and see if that northern area is blooming? Or you are now and not seeing it?
So we'll be there Monday, and like I said, we are taking measurements in the canals, and once we hit that so sometimes the cloudiness can also be from turbidity, which in that case, wouldn't be a reason to turn on the transducers, but if we have a high chlorophyll A reading on Monday, we'll activate next week. So.
And just your comment on turbidity, that's fascinating, because I thought the same thing and thought maybe that the muck removal down south by Kiwanis is causing that clear water there, but once you get north of that point where the water treatment plant is, that there's a ton of junk in there, and I'm wondering if the wind's just blowing that up, and that's why the northern area is getting messed up.
Other questions?
One more.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you want to go ahead, John?
No, go ahead.
Great presentation. On the first question is the fun question. On the slide that has the slider that goes back and forth, can you allow for people to pick the date of the previous one so that they could look at a specific date and then look at the current one and be able to adjust that? Sorry, more work, I know, but is that too hard to do, or is that potential?
We've talked about it. I don't really know where we landed on that, though.
So it used to have that ability, something about the software changed. We've gone back and forth about, what can be done and what's practical and how much work. So this is where we are right now. We've also looked at being able to have a running timeline, so you can see not just 1 week to the next week, but over the period of record.
I understand the limits of software. I'm just thinking the Google Earth kind of slider. So cool, of course you're already doing it. To the point of the impacts unknown, is there any monitoring of fish populations in the area around those docks ahead of time, pre-post, to see if when they're turned on, do fish stay away, things like that?
So not quite with our project. So when we're out there right now, we are looking at, anytime we see a dolphin or a manatee, we're making note of that when we're out there monitoring. For the fish, it's a little bit more complicated, and I had similar questions with the impacts as well, and I just wanted to say that the idea, so first we need to prove and see if this technology works, and if it does work, the idea would be to target those super blooms. It wouldn't be something that we would turn on everyone's docks all the time for months at a time. It would be, targeting a super bloom event that we saw has negative impacts on manatees and dolphins, from Chuck's presentation as well. So again, we have limited funds to kind of see if it works, but something that we are trying to look at within the scope of the project.
Great. Good luck.
Thank you.
And just to quickly clarify on, you say the mechanism for the ultrasonic technology, you're trying to remove the cell quickly from the water column to the sediment? Is that what you're trying to do?
Yeah, so...
And so, do you have any idea how fast that might happen if it's as effective as you hope it is? Is it we're looking at days, weeks?
Days. So we will turn the transducers on, and as I mentioned, we'll come back in 3 days and turn them off. So that if it works, it should work within a few days. And then again, the idea, how you're saying, is to, kill them before they have a chance to reproduce and form a bigger bloom than what they already started.
Okay, quickly.
Yeah, two real quick. One to that. My understanding is that it keeps the algae from rising within the light zone, so it can't actually get up and get any light, and then it dies and drops. But the second one is there any way for you to let me know what days they're turned on? I know it's only a 50-acre spread for that thing, but I literally am right outside that area, and that's where I see all the dolphins. And to just at least try to monitor if they're coming back and eating at 5 in the evening or not.
If it's okay with Virginia, it's okay with me.
Good answer.
Yeah, let's ask the expert.
Okay, thank you very much. It was
Thank you.
very- Now, we have some videos.
Let it roll, Logan.
I began fishing down here in the 90s. My father had Parkinson's disease, and I brought him to the Mosquito Lagoon in 2003 after he had to retire. And we took him out with a guide into the Mosquito Lagoon, and they set up a chair on the front of the flats boat, and he caught a really big redfish. And I have a picture of him with that redfish standing up when he had Parkinson's to show it off. And he then took it out to California, where he was living with my mom in a small cabin up in the mountains, and had it on the wall and told everyone he'd caught it in Lake Tahoe as a joke. And so I now have that mount at my house when I moved here. My background originally was from the 4th grade on. I was going to study sharks and I was going to be a marine biologist. Went off to college, got the degree and everything, and there were like no jobs to study sharks at that time. So I went into healthcare. But I've always loved the water. I love to fish. I love to be out on the water. And about 15 years ago, when we were living in Jacksonville, my wife and I said, if we could live anywhere, where would we want to be? And that place was here on the Indian River Lagoon. And we got lucky and had an opportunity to move here about 3 years ago. And so when I got here, it rejuvenated my interest in the science, and I started volunteering at different places and said, oh wow, this county's got this half-cent sales tax. What a great idea. I've learned about the Citizens Oversight Committee and said, maybe I can take my expertise in hospital administration, running hospitals, in population health and how you improve the health of a city or a community, as well as my love for the marine biology, and put those together and see if I can help through the committee and represent the people and make sure that we spend the money appropriately, that we're doing projects that are based on science, etc. I think solving problems with the lagoon is very complex. There are a lot of issues. There are a lot of inputs that are creating difficulties that you're trying to fix. And at the same time, the biggest issue we face is actually keeping people interested and understanding that this is a long-term process. We're doing things, I believe, that are correct, that are making those differences, but we're nowhere near over the hump. We're gonna have to continue doing this work for a while. So keeping people engaged, because everybody can play a role in helping, whether that's a simple thing like picking up the trash, to serving on a committee or volunteering to do work. So hopefully we can keep the people engaged so we can do what they did in 2016, and we can keep working to fix this lagoon. It's been really important for us. When we moved into a house here, we decided no fertilizer, no weed killer on the lawns, and the lawn's been fine. It's a little more natural looking, and so that's cool. We do plant native plants around the house. I've put rain barrels in at the house. I'm pulling tires and trash out of the lagoon, and I also am doing oyster gardening for the zoo, which has been really cool to learn that. One of the other activities I've done to help the lagoon out is I've launched Explore the IRL, which is a YouTube and Facebook channel that I launched about 1.5 years ago to get people to learn more about the lagoon, and I interview individuals and key leaders in the community. I do videos of trash pickup, I do videos when I'm out fishing and things like that, just to get people to understand all of the various things about the lagoon, helping to clean the lagoon and restore it, as well as places you can go and things you can do. It's a beautiful place. If you have questions or comments or ideas about the lagoon, my email is fredgoldsteincoc@yahoo.com. Please feel free to send me information. Happy to communicate with you all. We represent you.
Good. Good job.
All right, so if Brandon was here, he would remind all of the rest of you, I know Deb's already done hers, but the rest of you to pick a date and film your My Lagoon story like Fred just did. So thank you. And next up, we have the Titusville Tree Box Project.
This is the City of Titusville, a City Hall and Commons Basin tree box project. A tree box is a box that gets placed next to a stormwater inlet in an already installed stormwater system. The box consists of a nutrient-reducing media that goes in the box as the stormwater goes through it. It helps reduce the nitrogen and phosphorus within the stormwater. You also place a tree inside the tree box. Those tree roots uptake the nitrogen and phosphorus to help the tree grow, so it removes it from the stormwater before it enters the Indian River Lagoon.
These tree boxes are part of an LID project, or low impact development, and that's a way to capture and treat stormwater in more urban areas where you can't put large stormwater treatments like ponds.
The Indian River Lagoon is very important to the city and Brevard County as a whole. It helps tourism, it brings people to our city, and protecting the animals and the plants that live in the lagoon is very important. And this is the first tree box project that the city has done. We would not have been able to do this project without help from the Save Our Indian River Lagoon program.
Many cities have been incorporating LID projects to help treat their stormwater. Homeowners can help out by incorporating similar practices on a smaller scale as well. They can install things like rain gardens that help slow down the stormwater, or rain barrels that trap the stormwater. If they live along the water, they can install a no-mow buffer zone of plants that will help absorb that nutrient pollution before it gets into the water. Find out ways that you can join us in helping to get to a healthier lagoon faster. Go to lagoonloyal.com.
Okay, thank you. Now, old business?
No old business.
No old business. Do we have to vote on that or just keep going? There you go. Appreciate your indulgence. New business. Any new business came out of this today? Thank you. Now we're ready for general comments. Do they have cards or?
I haven't received no cards today.
Well, I saw all those people. I thought they were going to talk. One guy's pretty good size there. I was going to agree with you. Okay. Yes, ma'am. I apologize.
I'll talk, if I'm allowed.
Yes.
Okay. I'm Susan Connolly. This is my first time to be at a Sorrel meeting. I'm very impressed. It fills me with great hope and excitement. Currently, I'm working with the Speak Up Brevard program. I submitted submissions to our county for consideration. And out of curiosity, as a citizen, I've reviewed other citizens who have submitted. And what I've seen is there were 77 submissions, and predominantly they have to do with LID, saving the lagoon, and what citizens can do. I see Virginia Barker here, and I'm hoping that through a combination of citizens and what you all are doing, that we can, and the government, can find prevention, start at prevention, and somehow all these pieces come together for the good. But thank you all. I can't wait to follow up with many of you individually.
Please come back. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on. Final comments from around the circle? Suggestions? Yes, ma'am.
There's going to be a public BMAP, Basin Management Action Plan meeting in Titusville. So if you want to participate in and put in some input in that, or, learn what potential updates might be. And it's on May the 8th at 9:00 a.m. That's a Thursday, May 8th, 9 a.m. at the Titusville City Hall in the council chambers. And so hopefully some of you guys can come. Thank you.
Thank you.
There just to follow up on that, they're holding BMAP meetings on all 3 of the sublagoons, and so the other 2 are on May 7th. There's one in in Sebastian and Cocoa. Thank you.
Where was the third
Right,
one?
at the Ag Center? Yes. So one at 9.
1 and 2, and then one's the next day.
Yes, yes, sir.
I just want to thank all of our presenters for great presentations and to the Natural Resources Department for their continued great work and success, and reiterate the one thing that was mentioned earlier about the Eyes on Seagrass program, to encourage everyone to get out there, to get in the lagoon, take pictures, share them, use the hashtags, explore the IRL and the different things out there to promote it to the people that come to visit and the people that live here, to remind them to stay involved and to help count the seagrasses, because that's going to help a lot getting some of that just community support.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Sorry.
I'd just like to say the staff did a wonderful job at the April 4th First Friday event. I was there. The T-shirt stuff was really fun. People were really, really engaged, and I just want to say thank you to all of you. It was great.
I want to second that. It was really fun to make those shirts.
Well, thank you. Your staff sitting in the back, we don't ever give you enough thank yous, and we appreciate it, and that y'all help us in between, and thank you. Yes, sir.
I have a comment if y'all are done, and we'll.
I'm done.
Okay.
Please.
Where?
It's open.
Is it on the screen?
Serious business.
Okay, last week, there were a number of articles that came out in the Tampa Bay Times and then got picked up in the press around the state about these reporters looked at Florida's water quality programs and assessed whether they were working or not. And they looked at a 25-year history of water quality data and produced these maps where, based on their analysis of the data, they gave people colors of whether pollution was getting worse or staying the same, is in red, or whether it was getting better, is over there on the right in the blue-green. And so you see that the Indian River Lagoon is all lit up red. And that is kind of different than the perspective that we have, seeing the clear water out there and seeing some beginning of seagrass recovery. And so I just wanted to share some of how their analysis can be true and our perspective can also be true all at the same time. Had a number of presentations earlier today looking at data specific to the water body IDs, right? Each of these segments of the lagoon has got water quality data being collected and analyzed. And so I'm going to show you data that was pulled from the state's water quality database and then interpreted in graphs by Don Dice, presented to this committee a few months ago, but since Don's not here, I've borrowed his data. So, right, these are data from the Mosquito Lagoon. Summer data is in the green line, winter data is in the black line. The first time period is 1997 to 2008. 2008, we had Tropical Storm Faye, thank you, right? And Faye just released a lot of nutrients from the watershed and a lot of water, a lot of fresh water. And so then the center panel is 2008 to 2016 to the Fishkill super bloom, not the first 2011 super bloom, but the Fishkill Super Bloom. And then the last panel is sort of the history of this program, 2017 to, well, this data runs through 2023. And so you can see that in their analysis, looking at a 25-year span, we are finally back to sort of where we were 25 years ago. But when you look at it at a finer temporal scale, you see that nitrogen levels were getting lower, so we were getting better in that first panel, then we were getting worse for a decade in the center panel, and then we've been getting better in the last panel. So this is Mosquito Lagoon. The next couple slides are other parts of the lagoon, more complicated. So here, this is the Banana River. So each of the rows across is a different WIBID, and these are not north to south. For whatever reason, they are south to north. But so the southern banana is across the top pictures, the central banana between 520 and 528 across the middle, and then the northern banana across the bottom. But you sort of see the same pattern of in the first 10 years, things were getting a little better. In the middle 10 years, things were getting worse. And in the last 10 years, things have been getting better. So then we go to the northern Indian River Lagoon. Similar story here. So even though their data doesn't find a net improvement, we hope that what we're seeing in this last panel will continue if we keep doing the right things, and we are on our way to a better place. But just like other conversations today, in the central lagoon, really from Rockledge through Grant, to almost Sebastian Inlet, we are not seeing that improvement. And so you see in the right-hand panels, it's flat or worsening, right? We're just not getting those improvements in that segment of the lagoon. That remains to be a challenge for us. And, Lori presented a whole lot of information on seagrass today, and we talked about the importance of these shallow shoals where we're seeing the recovery, right? So seagrass needs light to grow. In the shallowest areas, that's where sunlight's going to be able to penetrate first. So we're seeing recovery in those shallow shoals first. But to get the longer transect length and to get more acres of seagrass, we've got to get it to grow into deeper and deeper water, and that's going to require clearer and clearer water, right? Better conditions. And our whole strategy and the Basin Management Action Plan strategy is to go after the cheapest, most cost-effective, quickest, projects to get done first. So our septic remediation plan, we identified those septic systems that were the most polluting in the system. And so if we retrofit those, if we either connect them to sewer or we upgrade them to advanced septic, we're going to get the best bang for the buck. And so those systems that are funded in the Save Our Lagoon plan, they're in the green circle, about $800 per pound. If that's not enough, like Chuck said, the TMDL is, well, this is what we think you need to do. We'll do that. We'll reassess. We may need to do more. If we need to do more, then those medium worse septic systems, they're in that middle row, right? We have to do twice as many of them to achieve a similar amount of nitrogen removal, and, like 4 times as many of them. And so they're going to cost $3,700 per pound. And if that's not enough and we've got to go get them all, that's the third row, those are going to cost like $7,000 a pound. And so almost 10 times more. So just the way that we are going about this return on investment, we're doing the cheapest, easiest things first, but the more that we have to do, the further we have to go, the harder and more expensive it's going to be. And so just keeping that in mind, that we have big challenges ahead of us, and we can't count on the successes that we've seen so far and say, okay, that's enough. We're not done yet. Got a long way to go. Thanks for indulging me.
Thank you. It went very well for you folks. Thank you. Appreciate your patience.
One quick comment.
I apologize.
I want to thank you for doing that. That article that I saw, when I first read through it, as you know, it kind of just stunned me because it didn't say anything about what this or what we're actually doing. And then to find out some of the communications just made me feel worse. And I think what's so important about it is when people read that, they're going to get a sense that there's not much happening here. And so it's not working. So we need to get, all of us have to be out there and really just continue to provide education. Those presentations were unbelievably great, so thank you all very much. And thank you for addressing that. I just thought, if you look at the article, I was waiting, where are we going to discuss this? And it just never shows up, and so very unfortunate. Thanks.
Apologize, I was too quick. Anything else before we break up? Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous statements expressed by any member of the public during any such period.